Hey guys! Part 4 of What If Naruto was in Mass Effect. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 16: Cafe Chats and Chilling Confrontations. Naruto has somehow convinced me that you are more useful to us alive and talking, though if it weren't for the fact that he holds significant sway within my team with his recent actions and they agreed with him, I would currently be examining your corpses in CSEC's morgue. Kasumi knew she should have listened to her instincts when she had first heard about the job from Miranda. Jane Shepherd now sat across from the pair of them and delivering her view on their actions in the cold, detached manner that made it clear that they were both living on borrowed time. Not that I am complaining about the whole not killing us thing, thank you for that, but there is no reason we cannot be civil about this. Wine? Kasumi was weighing up whether or not throwing Miranda under the bus here would help her position or not, the Cerberus woman remarkably composed as she poured herself a glass of the red wine the subject of their espionage had brought them. I don't think you are taking this seriously enough, though perhaps you don't understand how serious your situation is. Commander Shepherd, who Kasumi was planning on referring to as politely as possible going forward, was interrupted by the arrival of this Naruto with 2 bowls of what looked to be some kind of ramen dish. She is taking this very seriously, Shepherd Taishu. You should have seen how her body language changed when I pointed you out. This is obviously her attempt to remain in control of the situation. Besides, I thought we agreed we would only kill one of them as a statement. So why not work on the one who is clearly in the dark about how much trouble their thieving has landed them in? The warm smile on the boy's face was affront. That was all Kasumi could think as Shepherd's eyes shot across to her own with an intensity that made her flinch slightly. And here I thought you would be the good cop, Mr. Uzumaki. Apologies, but with the Alliance records about your military rank being so clearly forged, I don't know what rank I should be referring to you as, though the alterations we have made have put into the system put you at the rank of lieutenant. Miranda's comment made Kasumi throw a mild betrayed glance in her employer's direction. Miranda had mentioned nothing about Naruto's false records in her briefing. It was only something Kasumi had dug up on her own during her preparations. Given he is the only one keeping you alive at this point, I would definitely say that puts him in the good cop part of this interrogation, though with how you have obviously been digging into his secrets. Commander Shepherd paused as Naruto gave Miranda a thoughtful frown. You are the one that has been shoring up my history. Rex mentioned that someone had been changing things other than him. Naruto held up his hand as Miranda smiled in her usual confident manner, his smile changing to a very serious expression, his gesture stopping her before she could interrupt him. If you think that such information helps your case here, it doesn't. The fact you were making such modifications means that you know exactly what you were getting your friend here to steal from us. And that means that you are a very clear security risk that needs dealing with. For the first time in the conversation, Kasumi saw Miranda lose control for a moment, a slight widening of her eyes at Naruto's blunt dismissal of her help, a reaction that would have given Kasumi a giggling fit less than an hour ago, but now all it meant was that the pit forming in her stomach grew that much bigger. It was clear to Kasumi that she had a choice. Though as Shepherd's face morphed into a vicious smirk, she was uncertain about what the results of her choice would lead to. Whilst giving herself up at this stage to the Spectre's tender mercies might save her from being killed now, on the other hand, being handed over to Alliance would merely move her death sentence back by days or weeks at best. Her legend was too well known in the underworld for her former targets not to take a chance when it presented itself. At the same time, Miranda was very clearly losing this argument/interrogation. And the fact she hadn't revealed her Cerberus background yet made it clear that she thought it would make things worse, not better in this situation. There was no way. And what would you say if I said that this entire exercise had been planned in order to highlight to you the gaps in your security systems? The question was a little too haughty, even by Miranda's standards, which was why Kasumi wasn't surprised when Commander Shepherd dismissed Miranda's attempt to legitimize their venture with a wave of her hand. If there were holes in the Normandy's security systems, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. Kasumi, though, was focused on Naruto's expression, the young man seemingly appraising Miranda for a few seconds before leaning across and whispering something into Shepherd's ear. which caused her to scowl before she glanced across at him questioningly. Let's be honest, Shepherd Taishu. If it weren't for MY security systems on the ship, we wouldn't be having this conversation and they would be in the wind regardless of their end intentions. We can't trust that I have found every flaw in the systems aboard the ship, and given the information that Pretty-chan has implied she is aware of, we can't just get rid of her. I would bet that she isn't the only one with that information. Miranda flushed angrily at the nickname Naruto gave her, and Kasumi logged it mentally if she managed to get out of this situation. It seemed the young man in front of her was very skilled at picking away at people's weak points, even if he had only met the pair of them for 20 or so minutes. Then her mind caught up with the rest of what he had said and she started to panic, given his earlier words about making an example out of one of them, then if Miranda was indispensable due to her knowledge and connections. Anything to add, Hood-chan? Even with the outfit, your emotions are remarkably easy to read. Kasumi's eyes widened as Naruto's smiling face turned to hers, the expression similar to the phrase she had heard in her childhood of the cat and the cream as he identified her emotional weakness with terrifying ease. She wasn't proud to admit that one of the reasons she had developed her flirty and upfront manner to disguise the secret that he had so casually revealed, as well as the hood that she used to hide her upper face everywhere but in her most secure hideaways. Even Keiji had taken over a year of working with her to earn her trust enough for her to remove the hood in front of him, though thankfully he had talked her into removing the face mask she had originally worn before she had started working with him. I'm very good at what I do, be it hacking, infiltrating an area or retrieving certain items, Naruto-sama. And did I mention that I am on the market for jobs? My rate is extremely reasonable. I don't mind working long hours and that red and yellow are my favorite colors. Probably a little too deferential for the situation, but as long as it got her out of being killed or handed over to the council, she wasn't that prideful. Naruto cast a long look at Commander Shepard's hair when the Spectre looked slightly confused about her comments on colors, the man openly chuckling when it seemed to finally twig what Kasumi had been referencing in Commander Shepard's head, the Spectre surprisingly glaring at Naruto instead of her. She has your terrible sense of humor, adds those little bits onto the ends of people's names, and has now got the same history of making my security teams look bad. Are you sure that you aren't related? There was an extra inflection upon the final word, wasn't something that Kasumi understood the importance of, but it seemed to be understood by the other three sat at the table, Naruto laughing once more but this time with a serious look in his eyes. Not one of mine, though if she is offering to work for us then I wouldn't mind taking her up on the offer, assuming of course that she plans on giving us back the files she retrieved. I can't be everywhere at once after all, and she certainly has enough skills to keep away from the usual shadows. The last sentence surprisingly brought a small smile to Miranda's face, something she flattened into her usual neutral expression the moment she realized it was there, but it seemed to be what Naruto was waiting on as he gestured to her victoriously. So you do know, but Hood-chan doesn't. How very callous of you, Pretty-chan. Shepherd Taishu, Pretty-chan seems to be the only one we need to worry about, though I think we can make use of Hood-chan's offer in tracking down a few things with Saren. Neither of them seem to have lied, but if we get them back to the ship then Ino-chan will be able to confirm that, and if there is anything else they are hiding from us. It wasn't an offer, but it was better than being handed over to CSCC or dealt with in a more abrupt manner, and given the fact that Miranda had all of her Cerberus secrets to hide then hopefully the focus would be on her instead of herself. $% caret and asterisk plus underscore. It seems Pretty-chan wasn't by herself after all. Either that or we aren't the only one interested in what she managed to get from the ship. The comment from Naruto made Jane groan internally, even as her sixth sense went from a mild discomforting sensation to screaming at her. Naruto stepping in front of their group as a dozen armed and fully armored human men and women subtly blocked the passage they were using to return to the main area of the Presidium. Similar number behind us, and the area means there are probably some providing overwatch from above as well. Guru's comment meant that this ambush had been thought out particularly well, and Jane was frustrated enough with how the day was going that she was tempted to go straight to the violent solution to let off some steam, even if they were outnumbered and outpositioned. Commander Shepard, apologies for the delay in your no doubt important journey, but our boss just wishes for a moment of your time. The voice came from the one nearest to them, dressed in blood-red armor, and with a sword of all things strapped to his back. He spoke with the sort of modulated tone that gave away nothing regarding his emotions, though he held himself in a haughty manner that made her anger flare. "And why shouldn't I just cut you down where you stand? I assume she is one of yours?" Jane gestured over her shoulder to where she had left Rex looking after the woman that Naruto had taken to calling Pretty-chan. "Because, Spectre, this is a meeting that you have wanted for years, even if your version would have me here in person rather than as a hollow projection." The appearance of a projection had Naruto raise his weapons before Jane stepped up and put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. The hand was there as much to prevent her own emotions boiling over as it was anything else, as there was only one human with this kind of power and ability that she wanted to meet, and by meet she meant put into the ground with her own hands. Cerberus. It was lucky that Naruto had unintentionally been forcing her to contain her instinctive reactions with his secrets and antics. Otherwise she would have started the fight right there regardless of the odds instead of growling out the word as if it were granite in her mouth. "I have followed your rise closely, Commander. Your successes even before Eden Prime were most impressive, though it is what you discovered there that has led to this encounter, as I know you take a dim view of my organization." Memories of her old N7 barracks, with bodies of her teammates where they were cut down in the carnage following the attempted arrest of the traitor, came to her as clearly as they did in her nightmares. "Ano, I have no idea who you are, Ji-san, but I can tell you that Jane Taishu is about 3 seconds from trying to blow your head off. Perhaps you should tell us what you are offering in this exchange before she really loses her temper and gets everyone here killed." Naruto was still wary of her after her earlier remonstration of his actions of the Citadel, but he was also somehow being the mature one despite her being almost a decade older than him, which worked remarkably well at cooling her temper. "You have quite the way of breaking the tension, Mr. Uzumaki, though having seen you go to town on those idiots on the council I am not overly surprised. The reason that I have not moved on to my offer yet is because Commander Shepard will not accept the deal as things stand due to past interactions she has had with our organization, so we must discuss that before we can hope to make any further headway." The calm manner in which the elusive man was giving her the opportunity to let loose emotions she had long since buried merely made the situation all the more infuriating, but at the same time it helped her remain somewhat focused as she spoke about something she had kept buried for a long time. "And you expect us to have a quick conversation about how one of you Cerberus bastards slaughtered my unit, and that will make everything okay again? You think that having a literal gun to my head and threatening my team is somehow going to make me forgive what you bastards have done to me?" Now that she was stood here, her self-styled nemesis stood before her, Jane couldn't help but feel a little cheated at his solemn expression even as his minions flinched at her outburst. And yet, despite the fact that Agent Pembroke was a member of that particular N7 group for almost 5 years, there was no evidence that he had done or acted in any way that would have hindered the alliance, or put you or your team in danger. Does it not strike you as odd that despite the fact that there was no evidence even after the regrettable incident where the Alliance tried to capture him, the Council knew exactly who the traitor in your group was and made the Alliance act so hurriedly in their attempt to subdue him? If it weren't for having dealt with the Council and Naruto's insinuations about them supporting Saren's attempts to destabilize the Alliance, Jane wouldn't even have given it a second thought before dismissing the elusive man's obvious attempt to make her second-guess what had gone on in her past. But now, forcing herself to relive memories she had tried so hard to bury, she could already see what the elusive man was driving at, Pembroke taking her under his wing despite his gruff and uncompromising exterior, pushing her to improve her skills further when the other members of Alliance Command would have had her doing publicity stunts and networking. It doesn't matter what he was there to do or not do, he still killed 2 of my team and left 2 others crippled along with a dozen Marines and MPs. Or does that not matter to you as you move your minions around like chess pieces, awaiting the day where you discard them and those they slaughter in your name for the greater good? That provoked a reaction, not just from the elusive man but the other members of Cerberus as they raised their weapons angrily, the sword-armed man drawing his blade as Naruto summoned his spear defensively. "Jane Taishu, as much as I want to teach the samurai wannabe a few things, can you and the nice Ji-san calm down a bit? Given that everyone bar Hood-chan is already in the know, I wouldn't have to hold back for once, but that will get messy and I can't promise there won't be casualties." It was a threat to the elusive man, a plea for her to calm down, and a way of winding up whoever the head operative was with the sword. I assume you already have your clones en route to counter-ambush us? Or are you implying there are other powers that you have that I am unaware of? The elusive man broke off from his thoughtful frown to look inquisitively in Naruto's direction, shaking his head and turning back to Jane a moment later. I will admit that I don't want to find out given what I have seen and heard of what you can do to the Geth, Mr. Uzumaki. But you are right, and I will skip straight to the meat of this little impasse, lest our tempers fray any further. I have information to trade for my agent's release, information both on Saren's activities and pertinent personal information that some members of your crew will find interesting. As a sign of goodwill, as well as to show the general level of information I am talking about, I am forwarding one of these personal pieces of information to you now. The urge to say no was eating at her even as her Omni-tool lit up a moment later to show a new message with a dozen documents attached to it. She had barely read the first couple of lines before her eyes shot up to glare at the elusive man with every ounce of hate she could muster. If this is a trick. But even if she couldn't take the chance, the anger in her stomach freezing over into cold, hard hatred even as the elusive man shook his head. Only confirmed a week ago, and I managed to stifle the information for now. The ward address is listed as well as the affiliations of those she was rescued from. Even if you hadn't been amicable at this meeting, I would have ensured that Mr. Uzumaki's network found that information before the end of the day. Given the fact that Naruto hadn't spoken up since his intervention to prevent a brawl breaking out, Jane assumed that either he couldn't tell or that he thought the elusive man was being honest. Either way, it was a deal with the devil. Either she refused good information for the sake of her personal grudges, and potentially get some of her team wounded or killed as well as making another powerful enemy to strike at her from the shadows. Or she released what could be their biggest information opportunity on Cerberus in years and leave herself open to blackmail if the elusive man threatened to let people know of the incident. I notice you are only bargaining for Pretty-chan. That's a little cold of you given Hood-chan has been quite the good contractor for you, Ji-san. Either that or you allowing us to utilize her skills without trying to attach any strings from your end. It was probably the most uncertain Naruto had ever sounded when spelling out his opponent's attempted machinations, something that was the equivalent of the young ninja tipping his hat to the elusive man's negotiating skills. Make of it what you will, Mr. Uzumaki. I wouldn't want to give things away to a future sparring partner after all, and you still have a lot to learn about the more delicate matters of diplomacy. The unspoken invitation that the elusive man would be contacting them in the future was enough to make up Jane's mind. The man was known to be one of the most powerful men in the galaxy after all. If preventing Saren from wiping out humanity meant strangling her sense of outrage that came with her logical approach, then so be it. They had made it to the Cerberus transport on the other side of the Citadel, a nondescript transport hauler that was perfect for the purposes of allowing people to move from one place to another, before Miranda finally built up the courage to speak her mind to him through the communicator two of his operatives were still transporting. You knew that they would catch me. The statement held the kind of furious undertone that the elusive man had only heard Miranda use when referring to her father before now, so whilst he could have tried to be vague and deflecting about the incident that he had just managed to prevent from escalating, instead he decided to take what he was going to start terming the Uzumaki approach. Uzumaki was an unknown with powers that he has probably not even started to reveal the extent of, even to his own team, so I prepared for the possibility that your overconfidence would lead to this situation. Would you have preferred it if I had left you to Commander Shepard's mercy when Goto invariably revealed your membership to Cerberus? Miranda's glare lessened slightly at his rather obvious verbal slap on the wrist, her face showing that she was imagining what the rather hot-headed spectre would have done to her in that circumstance. We will debrief you properly when we return to Base Theta 3, but despite your failure with the original mission objectives, I am pleased with how things turned out. There had always been the risk that Shepard wasn't prepared to listen to him. In fact, it was mostly due to Uzumaki's influence that she hadn't instigated that bloodbath. But with the data he had passed over to them, and the releasing of Ms. Goto into their service, there was now something he hadn't considered when arranging the standoff. Do you think Commander Shepard will be prepared to accommodate future agreements between us, Mr. Uzumaki? Or do you think I need to show some more goodwill before she accepts that I am on her side? His statement, seemingly to the room at large, had all of his operatives reaching for their weapons defensively before his waved hand made them go back to what they were doing before. I would ask how you knew I was here, but given how much you seem to know about me means that everything Udina and the Alliance know probably ends up getting to your ears shortly afterwards. He could tell that the Uzumaki's appearance startled more than one member of his team, the young ninja dropping down from the roof of his ship to stand in front of his projection with no sign of concern at the weapons being pointed at him. But back to your question, Ji-san, the boss will make damn sure that she never falls for the trap of you being on our side. No offense, Ji-san, but I don't think even you know what side you and this Cerberus organization are on. The blunt points made the young man in front of him seem less politically adept than he actually was, which when combined with his rather rash and boisterous personality made him quite the interesting sparring partner, even if some of Naruto's lack of knowledge was clearly real rather than faked as he liked to pretend. Interesting, I don't think I have had someone accuse us of being Bismarckian before. It means constantly shifting and changing your allegiances in order to gain the best possible outcome. The slight confusion had been barely noticeable in Naruto's face, but even if he was somewhat skilled at detecting falsehoods, the elusive man was decades ahead of him in terms of reading people still. Not quite what I meant, Ji-san, but close enough. Still, given the ship's about to take off, I need to get going. As much fun as you and Pretty-chan would be, Shepherd Taishu is pissed enough with me as it is. Kai looked like he wanted to stop Naruto, but with a mere shake of the head the elusive man dismissed that possibility from the man's mind, one of the characteristics that made him such a good operative in the field. Before you do, Uzumaki-san, I hope you will take this communicator back with you. It was a little spontaneous as decisions he made went, but something about Naruto's words had lit something of a fire inside of him. For all that people decried him and his organization as terrorists and warmongers, no one had ever accused them of lacking direction and reliability so succinctly before now, and even his own example of surmising the young man's accusation had made him consider the 20th century politician that he had referenced. Bismarck had been a great politician in leading, and an even better diplomat given how successfully he switched from one alliance to another at the drop of a hat. But eventually he had run into the brick wall that came with alienating so many potential allies for short-term gains and was one of the contributory causes for the two greatest wars in Earth's history. Judging by the calculating look on not only Naruto's face but Miranda's as well, he suddenly felt a lot better about his sudden decision. If he played this right, not only could he gain an inside path into contacting both Naruto and Commander Shepard once more, but he could make it seem like that had been his plan all along. Chapter 17. It's me and the other guy. The people were a blur around Jane as she walked hastily down the long corridors of the Citadel's main medical district, only resisting the urge to break into a run to avoid attracting attention to herself. She had left her team back at the Normandy with only the briefest of orders to secure the ship hangar and start questioning the thief they had been left with by that accursed man, who even after everything he and his filth had done to her thought a few hollow words would allow him to become her ally. It was probably not a good sign that none of them questioned where she was going. Her face probably showed more of her turbulent emotional state than she intended. Even Naruto hadn't tried to stop her going off by herself. That didn't mean he hadn't put a clone on watching her, of course. Given her standing orders, she would be more angry if he hadn't, out of fear of upsetting her. But given the rather tense air she had left between them when he decided to stop lying to her, it wasn't a sure thing. Still, she had other things to worry about right now. Working out how she felt about him and his recent actions would have to come later. Bringing up her Omnitool as she came to a stop, Jane took one last look at the address the elusive man had headed the file transfer he had so graciously gifted to her with, though the rather mercenary-looking guards at the front entrance of the private clinic's address was a bit of a giveaway. The three of them were intimidating enough to a civilian, but Jane picked out several things that made it clear to her that these were little more than street thugs. Only one of them was remotely close to acting professionally. The aged Turian stood to one side of the door and doing her best to ignore the other two as they distracted themselves with a card game of some sort. If that wasn't enough, the way she kept shifting showed that her battle-scarred Predator 3 armor was definitely scavenged and hadn't been modified to fit her frame. Fine for guard duty, but not what you wanted in sustained combat. Nothing she couldn't handle if she needed to then, and if they weren't prepared to back down, she had some anger issues she was more than happy to work off on them before heading inside to The thought came to a stop as she mentally steadied herself as the nightmares of her childhood threatened to surface once more. Looking up at her father as they walked through the woods towards town, the warm feeling of her mother's hand pulling her back as she tried to pull her forwards through the crowds. The screams and cries in the distance as they ran as fast as they could through the undergrowth. Fire and ash, her mother screaming in the arms of the bad aliens as Jane grabbed at her father's shirt, tears streaming down her face to mix with the blood coating her hands. The shark-like grin of the towering Batarian as he reached down to grab her, blood of her father covering his hands, not noticing her little arms gripping the handle of the blade stuck in her father's stomach. So much blood. Even after all these years, and reliving the nightmares more times than she could count both asleep and awake, Jane only just managed to repress her subconscious instinct to draw the blade at her hip defensively, the same blade that bore the blood of her father and her first kill in its sordid history. Several of the shrinks that she had been forced to go see had tried to get her to give up the blade, so that she could let the past rest and move on without her rather unique version of a coping mechanism. But she had made a promise, after waking up in the wasteland remnants she had called home and managed to stagger into Alliance-held territory when they counterattacked, that she wouldn't rest until she found out what happened to her mother and put every last slaver involved in the attack into the ground. And now, thanks to the man she had in second place on her shit list, she could hopefully achieve half of that particular life goal. Mind now steeled for what was to come, Jane moved forward once more, making no attempt at disguising her destination as she cut through the crowd that quickly parted around her. The Turian caught sight of her when she was about 20 yards away and said something rather brusquely to her companions, who were far too slow in reacting as she crossed the remaining distance between them. Move. Jane had no time for civility, and judging by the way the female Turian backed up a step with recognition on her face, at least one of them recognized exactly who she was. Who do you think you are, Ragnash? Though the translator didn't translate the final word of the Batarian's disgruntled riposte as he finished standing from where he had been playing a game with the human, Jane recognized it well enough as their shortened version of the word bitch. The full word literally translating as a woman who is only worthy of breeding with slaves and Varen. Rather than respond as the Batarian went into a typical macho power play of drawing his pistol and gesturing it in her direction, Jane merely smiled wolfishly. Seemed like she would get a chance to work out some aggression after all. Barash, it's... The Turian tried to speak up, probably to tell her comrades exactly who he was insulting, but by then the Batarian had pressed the muzzle of his pistol against her head, and it was too late. If she had introduced herself, they probably would have avoided this, Jane thought to herself, as she brought up her hand to knock the gun away from her head in the same motion that she slammed her armored fist into the Batarian's lightly armored underarm. But sometimes there was a need to let loose, and remind some idiots that they are nowhere near the top of the food chain, and given the way the Batarian crumpled like a rag doll, that was very much the case. You! Whatever the human was going to say was cut short, as she spun full circle to give him a spinning roundhouse kick that lifted him straight off his feet and slamming into the door they were meant to be guarding. Finishing her spin by slamming her knee into the Batarian's face as he tried to recover from her first attack, Jane was surprised to hear the clatter of a weapon hitting the floor off to her right, and as her gaze turned to the sound of the noise she found the Turian with hands in the air and assault rifle on the floor. They didn't pay me to take on a specter. Though she was clearly nervous, Jane was happy to see that the Turian had enough common sense to realize that she wasn't going to be able to win this fight. Good call. The Batarian was groaning incomprehensively on the floor, whilst the human seemed to have been knocked out from her single strike. And though they were gathering a crowd, it seemed enough people recognized her that they weren't calling CCC just yet. 2 guys and 3 blows, wait until I tell Neru. Damn it, girl, eyes on the prize. The fact she wanted to boast to the young ninja, even with everything that had happened recently, was not something she needed muddying her thoughts right now. Any more guards inside? The question was one she wouldn't normally ask, but right now she didn't have a team to provide backup in case things went badly. None that I know of. It's a fairly small clinic, but other than these 2 ruffians I've never interacted with anyone inside. Barash always insisted he dealt with our employer. Good enough for now, though it did now leave her with a bit of a quandary in case the Turian or one of the others did decide to call for backup whilst she was inside. She had been frustrated with things, even before they had arrived back on the Citadel, the events on Eden Prime catapulting her into this mess of politics, ancient myths and genocidal robots far faster than she could emotionally deal with. Not that she would ever admit that out loud, the last thing she needed was her team starting to doubt either her leadership or themselves. Damn it, pick your gun up and find something to restrain these two with. Then keep the crowd away, I have a call to make. To the Turian's credit, she didn't so much as flinch at the rather brusque order, grabbing her assault rifle from the floor before moving into the little structure to the side of the door that must serve as a gatehouse. Turning away and stepping towards the door, Jane brought up her Omni-tool display and scrolled through the features to find what she was looking for, the calm piece in her ear making the click noise of a call being initiated. As the ringing noise began, Jane started modifying the email from the elusive man, leaving only the bare bones of the information and a single picture in the email she was preparing. Shepard, good to hear from you. I heard there was a break-in on the Normandy. Did you catch the perpetrator, or do you want me to alert the executor that we need to start a manhunt? Don't tell me it was Naruto doing another test. Despite her aggravation at the way the day had gone, so much of her past and the insecurities that came with it being stirred together in a giant pot, Captain Anderson's voice brought a slight smile to her face. The fact that such a manhunt would have cost every dreg of influence the man had on the Citadel didn't bother him for a moment. He would gladly sacrifice that to protect his people as he viewed the crew of the Normandy. No need, we caught the perpetrator, though I do have a favor to ask. Now she just had to work out how to ask the man for support without making it sound like she didn't trust her own team. I know it is a lot to take in, Ino-chan. Naruto trailed off as he sat awkwardly next to the Normandy medbay bed that he had transferred Ino to via clone the moment he realized how far the scary G-San's reach potentially extended. The fact that the G-San had known such about him and his abilities meant that the alliance was compromised, not that such a fact particularly surprised him anymore. Jiraiya had been adamant that telling more than 3 people a secret meant it wasn't a secret any longer. Given he already had a soft enemy in the council, even if they didn't realize it, Naruto was glad he had kept so much of his history and powers to himself. The fact that the news was out though meant that the details about Ino's injury, and who she was, wouldn't be far behind. And the number of people that Naruto felt he could trust with her safety were less than double digits if he was being generous. And after the disagreement he and Jane had, generosity was not something in his vocabulary right now. Shika, he was always such a stubborn baka. Ino was taking the news of Shikamaru's death better than someone would normally expect, misty-eyed but remarkably controlled, whitened knuckles around rippled sheets the only physical sign of her grief. But after all they had been through on their original world, the friends they had lost and the torment of losing their lives and world, Naruto wouldn't really call the two of them emotionally stable members of society. Ino-chan, I'm so sorry. Just because she was dead into the loss didn't make giving the news any easier for him, and just like he had been beating himself up since they had defeated the Thorian, Ino would take a long time to come to terms with the fact that Shikamaru had sacrificed himself for her. Ha. The sound of laughter from Ino, as halting as it was given her exhaustion from the surgery, was not what Naruto expected from her following his apology. Looking up from where he had been awkwardly staring at his clenched crossed hands, Naruto saw Ino wiping a tear that had managed to escape down her cheek, looking at him with a smile that was much more expressive than her childhood smirk. Obviously he is still not as big a baka as you, Naruto. You haven't changed at all. What are you apologizing for this time? Joining a dangerous mission against someone who wants to summon what could well be the robots that destroyed so that you could look for us. The fact that you managed to find me but couldn't save Shika despite the fact he made his decision literally thousands of years ago? Or are you going to try and claim that you are somehow responsible for my latest injury despite being on the other side of a galaxy when it would have happened? So he did that before he woke up here. Good to know the old man hasn't gotten soft on us just due to his old age. Rex's voice from behind him made Naruto jump. He had been so focused on Ino he had somehow missed the door opening. The obvious surprise making Ino's smile widen that little bit more as he spun round to find the wizened Krogan stood at the door with a beaming figure stood next to him. Yeah, Big Brother was all torn up over the fact that I got a small cut whilst he and Dad rescued me and Mum. Not that I care, It gives me a cool scar to show off when I become a mercenary like them. The young Asari girl was about 4 inches shorter than Naruto was, her skin a dark purple color apart from a deep red gash on her left cheek, a Mass Effect round grazing it during her rescue mission. Naruto. Ino's muttered calling of his name was tinged with uncertainty, which reminded Naruto that she still had no idea about the various alien races that populated the galaxy, something that she was taking quite well given the circumstances. Sorry, Ino-chan, I suppose we should do some introductions and background on these guys and what else you can expect. The giant lizard is Rex and he is a Krogan. Think warmongering close combat machines that aren't much for talking things out, and that is pretty much what I've found thus far. Rex growled at the description but gave the Krogan attempt at a friendly wave to Ino, but before Naruto could continue there was suddenly a purple body between him and Ino, literally vibrating in excitement as she unleashed a torrent of words. Hi, I'm Nora Lee Vertiges, but you can call me Nora as I know humans struggle with the pronunciation at times, though Big Brother tells me you and him aren't humans at all. Does that mean you are an awesome space ninja like he is? He says I'm not to speak about it, but I think we are okay aboard this ship, right? Given the squirrel in the path of a right unjutsu look that Ino was adorning right now, Naruto decided to be gracious and pulled the little purple ball of energy away from her slightly, before chuckling as Nora turned to him with a pout she had obviously spent far too long practicing. Sorry about that, Ino. Nora still needs to learn how to act around people properly, though it is nice to see she isn't as grumpy as her dad is all the time. Nora's pout turned into a giggle as Rex huffed from behind him, but his words had little calming effect on Ino from the looks of it, the girl running through 4 familiar hand signs before pointing her linked fingers at Naruto insistently as they glowed bright blue with chakra. Very brave for a ninja, she does remember exactly whose head she's creating a conduit to. All I'd need to do was flare my chakra just a little bit. Kyuubi was in a confrontational mood. He had been since they had encountered the scary Ji-san and Naruto had revealed his side business to Jane, something the kitsune had definitely not agreed with before or after the reveal. You do realize I can hear you, Kyuubi-san? Of course you do, not important right now. The feeling of having someone effectively inside his head wasn't exactly new to Naruto, both from his experience with the Kyuubi as well as the prolific use the jutsu had seen during the guerrilla action after the invasion. But as Nora clapped her hands together excitedly, he knew it was going to complicate the next few minutes. Wow, did Big Sis just do a spell or something? Nothing seems to have happened. Perhaps it's a summoning spell of some type and takes a while to kick in. Is it for summoning sloths? As Nora started darting round the room, no doubt looking for the arrival of these mysterious sloths, Naruto noticed Ino still hadn't calmed down despite establishing the link with him. Everything okay, Ino-chan? I know Nora's a bit much at first with all the questions, but she doesn't expect you to actually answer most of them. Or any of them really, given the rather hostile environment she had grown up in. Nora was worryingly used to people ignoring her unless they had to listen. Ino's face changed for the first time since she had spotted Rex and Nora at the door, the girl looking at him as if he was crazy before a sudden look of realization crossed over her face, and she threw a frustrated glare in his direction. You don't even realize that, unlike you, I can't understand a word they are saying? And here I thought Sakura and I beat the baka out of you. The silence inside Naruto's head was deafening, for all of 3 seconds until the awkwardness was broken by the booming laugh of his tenant. Ha 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 ha, you haven't given her a translator, brat. That is so embarrassing for you. With his rapidly returning brain function, Naruto could feel the weight of the spare translator he had gotten from Nirali in the thigh pouch of his armor suit. He had just been so relieved to talk with someone from his home world that it had slipped his mind as they started talking. Are you okay, big brother? Your face has gone all red all of a sudden. Did I say something wrong? Nora looked absolutely distraught at the idea she had done something wrong, the emotional distress enough to drag Naruto from his embarrassment, leaning down to pat her on the head in what he hoped was encouraging manner. It's not you, Nora, I just forgot something quite important when introducing you. Can you please give us a minute and then come back? I'm sure Ino will be much happier to see you then. Casting a meaningful look at Rex, Naruto pushed Nora gently back towards her father, the girl looking like she was about to protest before surprisingly being able to read the tone of the room. Without another word, Rex and Nora left the room, leaving the two of them alone once more, Kyuubi's laughter still ringing in Naruto's mind as he turned back towards Ino with an apologetic look, Ino canceling the jutsu now they were alone. Sorry, Ino. I was just so excited to see and speak to you again I completely forgot about it. I have one of these translator things here that I meant to give you. Reaching for the translator piece, Naruto heard Ino shift on the bed and gasp slightly to herself, dragging his eyes back up in time to see her pull the blanket away to reveal her amputated leg. You aren't the only one who forgot things, didn't even remember it was gone until I tried to move it to get out of this bed. How bad is it? The slight pause and hitching of her voice, as she reached down to run her hand along the slip of metal plating they had placed along the stump, made Naruto grab her hand reassuringly before she could get any more worked up over it. It was a clean break, given you were in stasis, otherwise it could have been much worse. They have a bunch of prosthetics? He struggled to remember the word that the doctors had used, but obviously Ino knew more than he did as she nodded in understanding, the shock and rapid adjustment to the rapidly evolving changes to her life causing her to be far quieter than her usual boisterous self. Once you have gotten your head round things, Ino-chan, Dr. Chukwas has said she will take you through the different types, though she says we might need to let the leg settle first. If you want, Ino-chan, I can tell the others you need some more time. She shook her head just as he expected, pulling her hand free from his and then holding it out expectantly with her best attempt at a resigned smile on her face. We don't have that time right now, especially with the whole galaxy-destroying robots you say someone is trying to bring back, and there's the fact that our friends are still out there waiting for us. Now give me whatever this translator is and explain to me how it works before that little purple Kisame girl comes charging back in here. It was a front, as much for his benefit as it was for her to calm herself down, but even as he handed the tool over, Naruto couldn't help the happy feeling in his chest. He wasn't alone anymore. Stupid Cerberus, stupid alliance, I should have known better. If being in a fabricated prison cell and stripped of her gear and weapons wasn't enough of a blight on Kasumi Goto's already shit year, then the noises she was hearing from the cell nearby were sufficient by themselves. Her former target, who had to be Spec Ops given the confidence with which he had stared down a Cerberus kill team, had come by 10 minutes ago with a blonde girl in a wheelchair and missing a leg below the knee. She had tried to not let her discomfort at the situation show, imitating her best coy tone as she waved and greeted them. But the girl had merely done 3 signs in an unfamiliar sign language without a word, and then the two of them had moved further down the block of cells on the cargo ship Spectre Shepherd used as a personal inventory whilst hunting around the galaxy. There was a minute or two of quiet other than the opening of one of the other cell doors and the buzzing of words too quiet for her to hear, and then the shouting and screaming had kicked off. Whatever they were doing to the woman in the other cell was nothing short of horrific, and Kasumi had the sinking feeling that once they were done she was going to be next. Come on, Kasumi, think. What have you got that can get you out of this? It was a bad habit she had kept even with Keiji there, but when you were a master thief who lived in the shadows, if she didn't talk to herself then she'd probably not use her voice for months at a time. Despite some of the situations she had ended up in over the years, Kasumi never had and never would delude herself into thinking she could somehow overpower the two when they walked in to interrogate her. She wasn't a close combat fighter by any stretch of imagination. She wasn't much of a fighter at all. She could take down a squad of basic mercs if she needed to with her skills, but that was hardly something to write home about, especially given whose ship she was on. If the reports were to be believed, and she had plundered them from the terminal of the human ambassador to be sure they were, most of the people on Shepard's kill team could do the same in a fraction of the time. So that ruled that out as an enticing offer to make. She would do well as part of the team on the ground. But if the Spectre was still out for blood, then that wouldn't be enough by itself. Given the fact they had caught her, the offer to act as their counterintelligence officer probably wouldn't hold much weight either, though from what her target had said in the restaurant she had gotten past the rest of them, just not his security measures. So perhaps appealing to him directly on that front would work? Assuming he isn't as pissed as Shepard is with Miranda getting away as she did. It was a pretty miserable thought, that the man might simply be interrogating them to blow off some steam, but it wasn't like Kasumi had much in the way of positives to look for right now as things were. Her only small ray of hope was that he had brought the woman in the wheelchair with him. Kasumi assumed that she was an interrogator or psychologist of some kind, which he wouldn't have done if he didn't want answers. Right. She's remarkably quick on the ball, though she is in no way nearly tough enough mentally for this kind of work. Ino would probably have expanded further from where she and Naruto were watching Kasumi have a minor mental breakdown, if she wasn't having to maintain 3 different jutsu at once. The first was the easiest to maintain, a modified genjutsu that was making Kasumi think they were rather brutally interrogating another prisoner, and using her and Naruto's minds as a base for when their illusion selves got to dealing with Kasumi. It was the other 2 that were far more challenging, linking her mind so that she could hear Kasumi's thoughts and another to make the young thief think in Japanese rather than English. It was remarkable that their languages were nearly identical given they were from different planets and times, but it was a poignant kick in the face to Ino all the same. If Naruto had asked her to interrogate literally anyone else, then Ino would have been useless without performing a full invasive scan of their brain, and even her father was unable to perform those kind of jutsu without some lasting effects on the subject. It was something the elemental nations had never had issues with, given that everyone spoke the same language, and until she could pick up the languages even passingly, then she wouldn't be able to understand the thoughts she got from her targets. Are you okay, Ino-chan? I think we have scared her enough that you can drop them now if you want to. No need to tire yourself out if you're still recovering. It was one of the things that she both loved and hated about Naruto. His incessant need to try and look after those around him was touching and infuriating in equal measure. Still, in this instance he had a point. Her chakra felt as lethargic as the rest of her body did, and she didn't want to risk chakra exhaustion given the circumstances. Bringing her hands up to form the tiger seal, she cancelled the 2 jutsu that were allowing her to read Kasumi's thoughts, though she maintained the genjutsu for the moment to allow them to continue talking in peace. True, but do you want to sell the idea just a little more? Just in case she gets stubborn? Her smile became a little predatory as Naruto turned to look at her a little confusedly. Just because she wouldn't be able to use her best techniques didn't mean she couldn't use some of her other skills effectively. The screaming cut off suddenly, and the sudden silence was quite possibly worse to Kasumi's already fragile grip on her composure, and for several minutes she was left with nothing but her own thoughts as she stayed as still as she could so as not to attract attention. Then, with a suddenness that made her jump physically as well as mentally, one of the cell doors was thrown open down the row of cells and a now familiar voice called out. "Captain, I am going to need 2 crew to come and deal with clean up here." The way it was said, with almost a joking tone when the man said clean up, made the fear that had been curling uncomfortably in the base of her stomach rear and threatened to take control entirely. Even with her hearing, that she knew from experience was far better than most humans could claim, she only just made out the man's approach before he appeared outside her cell. "Sorry about that, Thief-san, I had to get a little physical." Her eyes took in the details even as her mind struggled to comprehend the casual way he dismissed what must have been a brutal beating. This man who looked barely old enough to enlist covered in blood despite what was obviously an effort to clean himself up. Just as she was about to reply, Kasumi saw a pair of humans dressed in similar garb to the man in front of her run past her cell down the corridor, a cry of shock confirming what she had already mentally decided had happened. To her surprise, Naruto stayed silent as she watched them drag a body away, blood dripping and staining the dark steel floor. "D-chan, Hood-chan, Kasumi." She could hear what she thought was Naruto speaking to her, but it sounded fuzzy and distorted, and when she finally dragged her attention from the red skid marks outside her cell she found Naruto stood with a bloody knife in his hand. "Come on, Thief-san, come and play." No longer was the face the same as the one she first saw in the restaurant. There was a demented, almost crazed grin on his face, and a cold fury in his eyes. "Kai!" There was Naruto's real voice again, though it didn't come from the Naruto in front of her, who raised his knife in fury as a wave of blue energy rolled over her and blasted him back out of the cell. Then she was aware of someone's hand on her shoulder, and she nearly screamed when she looked up to find Naruto looking down at her, confusion and concern equally visible on his face. "Hood-chan, whatever you saw just now wasn't real, are you okay?" He released his hand and she scrambled backwards away from him, eyes darting around as she did her best to calm her labored breathing and get back some semblance of her composure. It didn't help, though Naruto backing up gently did, as her mind gave up on comprehending what had just room span and the next few minutes became a blur to her, though she made out the arrival of several other people from the various voices that pierced her loose grip on what was going on around her. What hap? Something took the illusion in. What do you mean? The commander needs to. As the room stopped spinning enough for Kasumi to get control of her breathing and regain a semblance of control over herself once more, she found herself backed into the corner of her now nearly empty cell, the woman in the wheelchair the only other occupant. She was clearly waiting for Kasumi to calm down, the only change in the woman's otherwise relaxed demeanor the occasional uncomfortable shift, probably due to her injury. The silence stretched out over what felt like forever, but it seemed to help Kasumi calm down to the point where she felt like vocalizing her most important question. What the fuck just happened? Kasumi wasn't normally one to swear, which may as much be due to the fact she rarely talked with anyone other than when it was business related, though she liked to think that it was a solid attempt to maintain one of the few good habits she had left after Keiji died. In this case, though, with whatever hallucinogenic drug they had somehow managed to pump into her system having gone terribly wrong, she felt that letting loose some of the fear and adrenaline that had built up in her system was worth a temporary relaxing of that rule. What do you know about Naruto Uzumaki? The woman seemed to ignore her question, though given it was the man who had just scared 20 years off her life they were talking about, Kasumi assumed he might have had something to do with whatever had just happened. He has to be at least Spec Ops given his skills, and I know that Cerberus are interested enough in him to try and have me obtain his medical files. His history, if you can call it that, is patchy at best. Any good investigator can tell that he was sprung from somewhere less than a year ago, though given that display I can understand why the Alliance and the Council don't want his work publicized. More importantly, given that I memorized the names and faces of every member of the Normandy's crew as well as Commander Shepard's associates before trying this job, who are you and why are you talking to me instead of the blonde and buff one? It wasn't that Kasumi wanted Naruto in here right now, and she suspected that was part of the reason he wasn't there. Given the scare she had just had, seeing him again would definitely not have gone particularly well. But the woman was a mystery to her, and given the slight wince that was gone in an instant when Kasumi referred to the hallucination, she had something to do with what had just happened. My name is Ino Yamanaka. I am one of Naruto's team, or I was before he got the leg up on me. The attempted joke about her leg was a thin one, but it was clearly meant to help metaphorically disarm the woman from Kasumi's point of view and make her more approachable. As much as I want to hear the story of however you got that, can we please jump to the point where you either ask me for whatever information you want so we can get this over with? I am really not in the mood right now for whatever games you are trying to play. All she wanted right now was a long hot bath, some food, and to try and sleep this shitstorm of a day off, and given she wasn't going to get two of them, in all likelihood the third would have to do. A bath could be arranged. To be honest, Naruto only wanted you in here originally so that we could get a read on you and your mindset. We wouldn't want you walking around as a flight risk after all. Ino's, if that was her name, words had Kasumi panicking. Was she so tired that she had said that out loud? It is my real name. Given that there are literally no records on me, there wouldn't be much point in coming up with a fake name. And you aren't saying anything out loud. I am just trying to prove something to you so that when I explain things you aren't going to start claiming I'm lying. Kasumi was doing her best to not let the implications of what the woman was saying get to her, but there was no way. Yes, Ms. Goto, I am reading your mind. Kasumi only hoped that Naruto wasn't watching at that moment. Her earlier breakdown had created enough of a bad impression without him seeing her facial expression right now. Agent Vaughn, you have been utilizing almost twice your usual level of expenditure this month, and whilst it is still within the agreed limits, I have also noticed that you have spent a not insubstantial amount of your own personal income on an upgrade to your security systems. Is there a threat on the Citadel that we need to discuss? Barla huffed into his ventilator awkwardly, though the moment the shadow broker had instructed him by text to stay after the monthly updates of his top operatives, it had been obvious that he couldn't hide what was going on. Not a threat searched, volus breathing noise, but a mercenary decided to try and threaten me personally during a late-night negotiation. I have used incentives to hire some friends to make it clear that trying to brute force your way into our business is a bad idea. Best to make it sound like the matter was in hand, and he hadn't said anything that wasn't true. So the mercenary is dead? Or is this related to the rash of dead and crippled bounty hunters I am hearing about on the Citadel? Damn, Barla should have known he wasn't going to pull one over the shadow broker. The man was a legend for a reason after all. No, it seems that he is more resourceful than I had originally imagined, and that resourcefulness is racking up more of a body count than I thought one man could rack up in such a short time. To Barla's surprise, the shadow broker laughed, quite possibly for the first time Barla could remember, before an alert highlighted a new message on Barla's Omnitool. Send me everything you have on this mercenary Agent Vaughn. This sounds interesting enough to warrant some of my personal attention. And for some reason, despite the fact this problem was no longer his to worry about, the shadow broker's interest in this skull character did nothing to reassure Barla that this was going to make his life any easier. Chapter 18. A whole lot of heart. No offense, Commander, but must you get in a firefight every time you come to the Citadel? Captain Anderson's shouted rhetorical question made Jane grin for a moment before the staccato of gunfire brought back the reality of the situation. This is not even the craziest part. Wait till you hear who I got the info from. You've missed the action, Anderson. Don't try and deny it. Leaning out from the column she was using as cover, Jane fired her pistol 3 times, breaking the shield on one of the Batarians attacking them and opening him up to her follow-up throw. I would prefer it I had my armor with me, or at least the rest of your team backing us up. Where the hell is CCC? It was a good question, since, even though the firefight had ended up with them falling back inside the clinic building, the initial exchanges were more than public enough that someone should have responded by now. 3 more Batarians appeared through the clinic's main doors, 2 of them carrying boarding shields that absorbed the rifle fire from Tursa, the Turian who seemed to have fallen in quite handily with following her orders. The other Batarian was the one that really worried her, carrying what looked like a heavy machine gun, shield flickering as Jane nailed him once in the helmet before he ducked behind the shield wall. Our cover isn't going to last long against that. Are they still jamming our signals? They were, and with the amount of equipment they had with them, along with the timing of the ambush, this had obviously been a trap for her. It made sense, of course, Jane thought as she ducked back as the HMG opened up, and whether the elusive man knew it was a trap or not was hardly of importance right now. For the quivering and shell-shocked person next to her, Jane would have walked into any number of traps and ambushes with a smile on her face. The clenched fists, uncontrollable shivering and wide eyes reminded Jane that the younger, much thinner version of her was definitely not trained for combat. Which, given her already fragile mental state, was not a good thing in the slightest. Cover me! Which meant it was time to get serious, Jane holstering her pistol and drawing her shotgun, waiting for the HMG to stop firing before moving from behind the pillar. Her barrier started taking fire immediately, but with the amount of shit they had gotten into recently, she had spent time honing her abilities on the Normandy, Anderson and Tursa beginning to target the Batarians who weren't behind the shield. The shielded Batarians obviously thought they were safe behind their improvised wall, but this was the perfect opportunity for Jane to test her new skill, based on what she had seen Naruto doing on pharaohs. A normal throw wouldn't be enough to dislodge the shields, but as she thrust both arms forward, the glowing energy on the 2 limbs joining together to make a biotic throw the size of a Volus, Jane liked to think she wasn't normal by any standard. The shields buckled under the force of the impact, the shield bearers staggering back from each other to make an opening. Calling upon her biotics once more, something she knew was going to give her a headache later, Jane charged. She was across the room in an instant, the HMG armed Batarian acting as her organic brake as her form slammed into his, transferring the kinetic energy of her movement into him as she turned her shotgun on the nearest of the 2 shield bearers and blasted 2 rounds into him at point-blank range. The bitches through, alert the other. Grabbing the remaining Batarian as the HMG Batarian was reduced to a stain on the wall, Jane used him as a shield as his comrades opened up, the alien's body riddled with bullets in the seconds before the joyful sound of weapons overheating filled her ears. Kicking the body, with a little biotic enhancement, saw it slam into 2 of the now panicking Batarian. Using the momentum of the kick, Jane turned and fired 2 rounds into the solitary Batarian that was on the left side of the clinic corridor, before turning back with a feral grin. Whilst he wasn't dead, Missing a leg below the knee would certainly keep him out of the action about to commence, something he may end up being thankful for. One of the remaining 4 Batarians had been clever enough to draw her sidearm, 2 shots finally destroying Jane's barrier before she replied with the final round of her shotgun before it overheated, breaking the Batarian's shield before Jane used the now useless firearm like a baseball bat to send her crumpling to the ground. Finishing the swing by releasing the shotgun to fly into the face of the next nearest Batarian, who had just finished trying to cool his weapon down and instead drawn his combat blade, Jane drew her pistol with the other hand. 2 rounds between the eyes dropped the stunned Batarian. The rest of the magazine dropped the other 2's shields as they charged towards her. Die Ragna. The first swing was so wide Joker could have dodged it, the haymaker allowing Jane to bury her own combat blade into the soft tissue of the Batarian's armpit, the second catching a biotic-empowered kick that sent him flying into the clinic wall with a heavy crack. It was at this point sounds rushed back to Jane, and she realized she was gasping for breath, drenched in sweat, and from the feel of things she had one hell of a nosebleed going on. There were still sounds of gunfire from outside, but it was Anderson's appreciative whistle that caused her to turn her head in his direction. Not exactly what I would call textbook methods of dealing with opponents behind cover, but it seems you have picked up some things from our mutual friend. Tersa was far less polite about her view on what she had just seen happen, the Turian swearing several times under her breath before gasping and raising her weapon towards the door, the reaction causing her to spin around with weapons at the ready. The boss sent me ahead in case you needed a hand, Taicho, though now I've seen you in action I think he needs to work harder on his apology. Now if you could stop pointing the gun and the little paper slicer at me, I can head back and let everyone know you are okay. The Naruto clone, as no one else would talk to her in such a sarcastic but deferential tone at the same time, was armed to the teeth and looked like he was ready to use it. What delayed everyone? I thought I managed to get another call out to you all before the jamming started? Jane knew she had, though given their public setting she neglected mentioning the message had been by shadow clone dispersal rather than by more traditional means. There were about 80 of these guys, Shepherd Taishu. They set up blockades on every route here and dug in. The boss and Rex are leading the push as CSCC were content to hem the bastards in. If we head out now we can control the situation before some CSCC idiot tries to let his position go to his head. Gurus may end up doing something the idiot will regret. The clone was right, but before taking control out there, she had orders to give here. Tersa, make sure all of these Tulakraduki are disarmed and not a threat. Probably try and stop a couple of them bleeding out at the same time. Looking at the female Batarian she had brained earlier, it was clear she had a concussion at least, though just to be safe Jane clocked her one to send her properly into the realms of unconsciousness. The phrase she used to refer to the dead/disabled Batarians was probably the worst insult she knew, quite literally a clan so despised and tainted that they are not worth using as slaves. But given their ruining of what was the happiest hour she had in years Jane felt it was justified. Seeing the Turian nod, Jane heading for the door a moment later, pausing at the door to give the most important order of all. Captain Anderson, when I give you the all-clear, get my sister out of here quietly. Commander Shepard managed to get a call out before they jammed her comms. Given the situation with the previous attempt on her life, our team mobilized and moved to deal with the situation as fast as we could, and you can see the results. It was a strange feeling, despite the executor keeping him on as an official member of CCC, to be providing evidence and guiding the official investigation into the attempted assassination of Commander Shepard from what was effectively the other side of the crime scene tape. 40 dead and 18 injured Batarians, all with not even a minor criminal record between them. 8 dead civilians, 6 dead and 5 injured CSCC officers. I don't call that results, investigator, I call that a disaster. Any idea how they knew where the Spectre would be? Special Investigator Jethris Market Gibbs was a Turian who had been a member of CCC since just after the First Contact War, widely regarded as a very effective, if not overly friendly, investigator. It probably has something to do with this boss, founded in the admin office of the clinic. It was not the first time Gurus had interacted with Market's team, though it was the first time he had worked on a case with them directly, so he recognized investigator Michael Donazzo as he walked up with the file in question. Gurus could guess what it was. Though they had gone to some effort to get Commander Shepard's newly discovered sister out of the area before the investigation began, they hadn't had time to do more than a hurried search of the clinic before CSCC actually took over. To his credit, Gibbs took one look at the picture on the front of the file before unclipping it and moving it inside the file itself, before fixing Gurus with his renowned 1,000-yard stare, as the humans called it. "Something you want to tell us, Agent Varkin?" Gurus shrugged. Despite their best efforts, the news would probably spread by the need of the day, especially if he acted evasive and caused these guys to start digging. Commander Shepard received intel that indicated a person of personal interest was being held here. I will need to ask the commander for more details if you need them, investigator. Any news on the remaining attackers? A dozen or so of the Protheans had broken through the CCC encirclement when it became clear the assassination attempt had failed, and though they'd managed to chase down a couple of them, the rest still at large. We have increased security on the main transportation hangars and checkpoints at the hubs between the Presidium and the Citadel bodies, but given we have no arrival records on these guys, it is obvious they got in through unofficial channels. Which I will contact the trafficking team about right now, boss. It was amusing to see Tony's reaction to Gibbs' raised eyebrow, the human hurriedly striding off towards a quieter area of the rather large crime scene to make the call. Without another word, Gibbs moved off towards the row of Batarian bodies, Gurus following as he could see two other members of Gibbs' team examining the bodies and taking photographs. McGee, Zavina, Sitrep. McGee, whose real name was Nicholas Jaron from what Gurus could remember, didn't even look up from where he was examining one of the fallen Batarians' Omni tools. Most of these have been wiped, too clean for amateurs to achieve, though if done by pros remarkably sloppy, should be able to extract some file fragments and track their movements. Local CCC team working to get camera footage, given Jammer Spector's team found unlikely to get good footage. Gibbs seemed to accept that was everything he was going to get from the Solarian, turning his attention to the female Drell that had just finished photographing the nearest Batarian. All the dead Batarians have had recent surgery on their right arms, no doubt to remove some kind of gang or group mark that could be used to identify them. Abby is running their past affiliations to see if it can be narrowed down. Despite the reports of heavy weaponry and armor, many of the Batarians were stripped of all valuables by the time we arrived, something that I am told is a habit of the young human attached to the Spectre's team. Gurus winced as Gibbs turned in his direction, though given there was a Spectre's involvement they could technically claim the gear. Gurus knew Gibbs would want to rule out every weapon that could have killed the civilians before chasing down the surviving Batarians. I will talk with the commander and see if your expert can come and perform ballistics testing on our armory. Though if these guys came from off the Citadel, we may be leaving to do some investigating of our own. This was assuming Naruto was storing the liberated weapons on the Normandy or the Ontario, but Gurus could work that out later. I'd prefer it if your team stayed on the Citadel, until I rule them out from having killed any of the civilians, but I suppose tracking the remaining suspects would normally be out of our authority. Zavina! The Drell jumped to attention, though Gurus noticed her arm instinctively went to her pistol. Go tell AI to pack up her gear and prepare your own. You will be acting as the liaison until we finish the investigation. Gurus was fairly certain that was in fact what his role was meant to be, but while CCC couldn't stop the Normandy from leaving the Citadel, there were several ways they could impound the Ontario for a couple of days if Gibbs wanted to be difficult. Understood. I will go speak to Tony and make sure he finishes off the scans and photos. Ducky wanted to speak to you, Gibbs, something he found with one of the civilians. That didn't sound good, especially with the suspicion that one of his team could have caught a civilian with a stray volley during their storming of the Batarian's position. The two of them walked over in silence to where the senior M.E. for the Presidium was helping two of his assistants lift the body of an Elcor that had been caught in the attack. Even with three of them they were struggling, so Gurus hurried forward to help them heft the body into the nearest grav car used by CCC when dealing with these kinds of crimes. You wanted to see me, Duck? No one had ever told Gurus why everyone called the aged Volus by different variations of the Earth avian animal. From what he had been able to find out, it had started less than a year after the Contact War, which was shortly after the Volus started with CCC. Yes, Jethris Search, I thought you might want to see this. I was scanning all of the victims to allow me to make a preliminary diagnosis, and I came across this poor fellow. The Volus waddled over to where another of his kind was laid out on the floor, 2 bloody holes in the lower part of his chest indicating what had killed him. But other than that, Gurus couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Looks like a double gunshot to the lower torso duct, not exactly a surprising cause of death, though obviously there is something I am missing if you are drawing our attention to it. The Volus chuckled to himself before nodding and gesturing to his omni-tool. Very astute, Jethris. Yes, I was very surprised at the fact these 2 wounds caused what seemed to be an almost instant death for our victim. He pretty much died where he fell given the blood pooling. Normally a gut shot or even 2 surge would have a decent chance of not hitting anything vital, and given it took us less than 20 minutes to clear to this point, we should have been able to at least try to save him. Tapping a couple more times on his omni-tool, Ducky suddenly lit the area up with a 3D hologram of the Volus in front of them, and even before he began speaking, Gurus knew what he was so interested in. Upon my initial scan, I was surprised to find that the cause of death was due to the bullets piercing the Volus' second heart, which looks to have been implant. Investigator? It was at this point Gurus realized that he was gripping his hands into fists hard enough for his suit's servomotors to be whining slightly. Dr. Salian. Judging by the sharp inhalation by the good doctor, he wasn't the only one who still knew the name, though Gurus was already moving away and downloading the information CCC had on the victim, only stopping when Gibbs barked from behind him. Investigator. Gurus was so worked up from the revelation that he barely resisted the urge to growl as he spun back. Thankfully he didn't, as Gibbs continued a moment later. Take McGee and Tony, they are pretty much done here and can help you with tracking down some leads. I would also contact your Spectre, given how much trouble your team like to get themselves into. The senior agent had a point, and whilst Shepard was going to be distracted with her sister and the assassination attempt, Gurus knew at least one member of the team that would be happy doing a little frog squashing. Perhaps he would call the favor Caden owed him as well, in place of the credits from the poker game. Keela. Tali wasn't going to try and claim she wasn't amazed and awed quite easily, though she liked to think, given the number of crazily dangerous and wonderful things she had seen or done since joining the Normandy, she was becoming harder to please. But as she watched the sparring match across the cargo bay, she really couldn't help but stop and gawk. Commander Shepard was considered a monster on the battlefield, an unflattering but accurate statement in Tali's opinion, given she had seen the results of some of the commander's close-quarter work more than once. She was currently unleashing a furious assault of biotic-enhanced punches, kicks, and other less traditional strikes that would have dropped your average Krogan in the first 10 to 15 seconds. You're wasting energy again, Shepard Taishu, and you're putting too much power into your strikes. The recipient of this onslaught, who for some reason volunteered to distract the commander whilst Dr. Chukwas was checking her sister over, was clearly struggling to stay ahead of the commander given how hard he was breathing. Despite the fact something had changed between them in a negative manner, Commander and Shinobi having been closer than some couples Tali knew until after an unknown incident on the Citadel, when they had returned from Pharaohs, Naruto retained his friendly jovial manner whilst sparring. He was doing a good job of redirecting the commander's emotions with his incessant dodging and advice, though the 2 times Shepard had caught him full on, her victory smirk had been damn near predatory in nature. With how much energy Shepard was unleashing, it was only another minute or so before she started to run out of metaphorical steam, her biotics flickering and her short, sharp jabs becoming more like labored haymakers. That's enough, Taicho. Naruto obviously had noticed the signs as well, though Shepard ignored his attempt to stop, something that Tali knew from experience would not end well. Naruto was more than happy to push people to their limits in training, which she knew from the days after their spars when every move felt like she was pulling a muscle. But when a certain Krogan pushed those limits, Naruto showed everyone why those limits weren't there for his safety. Rex had insisted on a spar following the revelations on Pharaohs, and quickly lost himself into the Krogan blood rage when Naruto spent his time dancing around the Krogan's attempts to grapple or tackle him. The rage increased his speed enough that he managed to catch one of Naruto's arms, but the attempt to bite it off made it clear that rational Rex wasn't home anymore. Everyone who had been off duty at the time had come to watch. No one wanted to miss such a clash of titans after all, which meant everyone got to watch what happened next. Naruto managed to pull back his arm enough to avoid losing it entirely, though Rex still removed enough of his bicep that Tali could have sworn she had seen bone as the young ninja roared. It was a sound so full of pain and anger that Shepard had jumped in to try and separate the two of them, only for Naruto's body to become covered in that red energy she had only seen him use once or twice before she could. Even as Rex went in for a second bite, Naruto spun with unnatural speed and punted the Krogan across the room with a single roundhouse kick, Rex's barrier shattering from just that one move. Then Naruto dashed after the tumbling Krogan so quickly he almost became a red blur, leaping into the air so that his heel kick slammed into the top of Rex's headplate just as the Krogan rolled to a stop, indenting the floor plate they were fighting on with the force of the impact. It was a merit to the Krogan's legendary toughness that Rex still managed to get up after that, though as Shepard and Kaden used lift to separate the two of them it was clear that the blow had given Rex a rather serious concussion at least. "Jane-chan, stop!" Thankfully the commander was not a Krogan lost in a blood rage, and Naruto reverting to using her first name seemed to be enough to break her out of her focused state, the biotic energy draining from her limbs and her relaxing to a more casual stance. It was clear how much punishment Shepard had inflicted upon herself a moment later, her legs giving way as the adrenaline left her body, something Naruto seemed to have anticipated as he caught her almost instantly. Tali was too far away to hear the short conversation the two of them held before Naruto helped move Shepard over to where she was sitting, but judging by the smile and the light blush on the commander's face it had obviously been something she approved of. The smile and the blush made Tali angry for a moment before she managed to beat the urge down. As much as she liked Naruto, something that was far from a secret on the ship given how much Ashley liked to wind her up about it, Tali knew that there was no way that it would work out even if he liked her back. Between the infection risks and the lack of actual skin-on-skin contact that could occur 99% of the time, as well as the obvious need for him to try and repopulate his race, she knew that even he would run out of patience eventually with her. "Come on, Tali-chan, your turn. After seeing how quickly you picked up some of the moves that I showed you last time, I am sure you will master these next couple in like 5 minutes. It was the sort of cheerful over-the-top boasting that would have annoyed Tali if anyone else had said it about themselves, but Naruto somehow always knew how to voice it like his honest appraisal of her skills and talent, which never failed to cheer her up, even if he didn't always realize what he was doing. The smile that had blossomed on her face turned bittersweet at that thought, because it was the sort of thought that Tali had about Commander Shepard as well on occasion, the fiery woman now surprisingly open and friendly with her despite knowing that she fancied Naruto. If the two of them did get together, which Tali would take as a consolation prize given her own inability to pursue him properly, Tali knew it would make her future all the more difficult to decide upon. Despite her desire to help her people and their fleet, Tali knew that if either of these humans asked her to instead spend her time permanently on the Normandy, or with them instead, she couldn't possibly hope to predict what her response would be. Another set of turrets. If we needed more proof that this Dr. Hart was doing something shady, the amount of automated defenses on a simple clinic definitely puts him on my naughty list. Kaden smirked at the exasperation in Investigator Donatso's voice. Whilst he had been a little uncertain at first about the inclusion of 2 CSCC officers in their strike team, the two of them had performed more than adequately as they dealt with the clinic's automated defenses. Good news is that I nearly have access to clinic's mainframe, just need to remove last few firewalls. Done! Investigator Jaren's work in hacking into the clinic was truly impressive to Kaden. While Skurs was a decent hacker when he put his mind to things, Kaden hadn't seen anyone hack into a system that quickly other than Tali. "Well, if you could turn these things off before we have to smash them all." "Well, I don't mind, but the collateral might make it harder to find something on this Salen guy, and then Gurus will get even more uptight." Rex probably wasn't joking about enjoying the smashing. But several seconds of furious tapping shut the turrets down before the Krogan could carry on his rampage. "Well done, Investigator. See if you can find anything that we can use to track Dr. Salian, or whatever alias he is using these days." With a nod the Solarian carried on typing away, leaving Kaden in charge of the room. Whilst there couldn't be an official ranking structure in a Spectre strike team, it was generally accepted that he and Gurus were usually the ones in charge of giving orders when Commander Shepard was busy. Whilst his seniority in terms of the time he had spent serving Shepard could have been used to pull rank, Caden decided instead it was personal involvement that meant he was in charge instead. Gurus, you and Donazzo search for any information about where Salian is, or whether he has another alias behind the Dr. Hart he used in opening up this place. Rex and I will handle security and clean up. The Krogan growled, but after a moment seemed to change his mind and started towards one of the inactive turrets. Better than paperwork, though I still want my frog squashing soon. Gurus was already flicking through papers and files, showing Caden that he had been right in his assumption. He didn't know the full story behind Gurus and the Solarian they were after, but as Agent Donazzo had to hand Gurus a pair of gloves and remind him not to contaminate an area where they could gather evidence, it was clear that whatever it was Gurus was letting it control him. Lieutenant Alenko. Joker's voice over the comm caused Caden to split his attention between him and dismantling one of the busted turrets, for parts. We are just clearing up, Joker. Good timing. I was about to call the Normandy for a salvage crew. Though I doubt it is some kind of hidden biotic-based premonition power that has you contacting me. There was a commotion between Agent Donazzo and Gurus, probably meaning they had found something of interest, but Caden wasn't confident of his ability to triple task effectively, so would check in a minute. Good guess. We think we have a lead, something that Drell chick came up with when the doctor sent us his initial findings. To say the commander is eager to get going is an understatement. Think you can wrap up what you need in 2 hours? Looking at where Gurus was working away on his Omni tool, Caden decided to make an executive decision. Rex and I will be back in half that, if Naruto can point us in the direction of his storage place on the Citadel, that he no doubt has but hasn't told us about yet. Gurus will stay here and coordinate any new evidence or missions that arise. That was going to definitely be a secondary concern for Gurus by the look of it. But Caden wasn't one to air people's private issues over comms. He would explain to Commander Shepard in person when they got back to the ship. Got it, I will patch you through now, see you in an hour. There was the hiss of static for a moment, before an unfamiliar female voice came over the comms. Send you spare parts and scraps service, Sarai speaking. How can we serve you today? Caden knew Naruto could change into a very convincing human female. The time he transformed naked in the middle of the canteen, one of Caden's most embarrassing memories of all time. But he couldn't out assume the voice on the phone was him without risking Naruto's secret. This is Lieutenant Alenko. I need to speak to Naruto Uzumaki about some personal items that I no longer need. It was one of the passphrase that Commander Shepard had come up with, in case anyone in the team wanted to confirm if they were talking to one of Naruto's disguised clones over the comms without outright asking. The boss is busy right now, Lieutenant, though he has left instruction to accommodate any business from a fine upstanding gentleman like yourself. The boss has recently hired a new team that I can allocate to obtain your items, though they will need you to sign for them when they arrive. Interesting, that made it sound like Naruto was using more than just clones now to populate his operation. Or at least that was how Caden understood what he was hearing. Of course, sending you the location now. Some of the packages are a little unwieldy, so they may need to bring a way of transporting them discreetly. Tell them to ask for Investigator Gurus Vicarian on arrival. He will make sure they only take the items they need to. Dear God, the more Caden carried on the conversation, the more he sounded like some cheesy spy out of Earth's movie history. I will make sure they bring some heavy lifting equipment and a grav cart. Understood, Lieutenant. Looking at the address, they will not make it there for at least an hour. Will that be an issue? Looking at where the 3 CCC agents were now beginning to rifle through the cabinets of medical files, Caden shook his head before realizing he wasn't on a video call. That won't be a problem. The urgency of these items isn't important. Just make sure that the team know the condition of the items on arrival is important. Of course, Lieutenant. Is there anything else? Letting the clone know there wasn't anything else, Caden dropped the call and started making his way over to Gurus. Even if the Turian was a little distracted, he would be professional enough to look after a retrieval team as well as his own investigation. Given he and Rex needed to start heading back to the Normandy if they were to make his self-imposed deadline in time, that's what Caden hoped at least. What have you found? The cold irritation that creeped into his voice was something that the elusive man would normally internally berate himself over. Composure and control were two of the most important characteristics a man of his position could possess, after all. but as the massive screen in front of him jumped to a camera feed showing the command room of one of the Cerberus satellite bases littering the Terminus system, Operator Kai wiping his blade on the body of one of several bodies littering the normally pristine rooms whilst considering his response. A little loss of emotional control felt justified in these particular circumstances. Senior Operative Bengal was very resistant to Agent King's approach of a surprise audit, and even when Operative Bengal let Agent King inside, she tried to prevent access to certain areas of the facility. When Agent King pressed for entrance, Operative Bengal ordered the other Cerberus agents at the facility to silence her. After the ambush at the facility Commander Shepard's was being held at, the elusive man had been more furious than he had been in years. After the considerable resources he had spent, both monetarily in hiring the likes of Goto and the smugglers to bring his agents aboard the Citadel to rescue Agent Lawson, but also in terms of manpower, his big attempt to mend some of the mental damage done to his organization's reputation had been potentially derailed within hours. Whilst he could claim ignorance regarding the trap to Uzumaki and by association Shepard, their view of Cerberus would make it very unlikely they would take his word at face value. I revealed myself to prevent Agent King from being sacrificed, and attempted to get the other agents to stand down. Whilst roughly 70% of the agents stood down on my order, the remaining 7 retreated to this control room and attempted to activate the facility's self-destruct mechanism. When I breached the door, they were unwilling to surrender. Despite himself, the elusive man let a ghost of a smile cross his face. Operator Kai was very zealous when dealing with those who opposed him or Cerberus, so the elusive man doubted that they had been given much of a chance to regret their decision. My team is in the process of sweeping the facility now, but given the additional security features not on our official manifest and their determination to prevent our investigation, either the leadership team we're dealing on the side or we're accepting bribes. Operative Bengal is alive for now. Do you wish me to interrogate her or bring her back with me? As much as the emotional side in the elusive man desired him to give Kai the go-ahead then and there, what Uzumaki had said about his organization made him take a deep breath and calm himself down. Bring her here. I need to know everything she has been doing, especially as all of her reports showed nothing more than the occasional deviation from her training. Kai nodded his head in understanding, allowing the elusive man to cut the feed, feeling a sensation he hadn't felt in years. His hands darted across the keyboard in front of him, bringing up report after report from the station in question. Everything was too normal, including the occasional blip in the writing style to show Operative Bengal had been stressed when she had written it, and because of that he hadn't even remembered the reports until he looked them up. And that was the problem. Dozens of these kind of reports passed to him, or his top operators every week. Years ago, these would have been exactly the type of reports that he would have focused on. They either implied that the reporter wasn't being pushed and therefore felt that average was perfectly okay, or he saw it as he flipped through the reports one after another, a pattern in the budgetary monies being spent on and brought in by Cerberus operations leading to money being allocated to operations he couldn't remember, and weren't mentioned in the bodies of the reports outside the budget. It was mostly values less than 20,000 credits, which meant he hadn't paid them any mind as he skimmed from one report to another, and the project names were bland enough that they hadn't caught his attention enough to remember from one week to the next. But over the 20 reports he had checked so far, Operative Bengal and her team had siphoned off over 150,000 credits via these dummy operations, enough to line their pockets significantly given their already lucrative wages. His hand paused on the last file, eyes fixed on the last project name Operative Bengal had used for siphoning money, though this one was a large credited operation designed to hide the losses from other projects. Standing from his seat, the elusive man moved with remarkable determination towards the side room he had for contacting people via quantum entanglement. His chair continued spinning from the force of the sudden movement for a few seconds, before coming to a stop with only the slightest of squeaks. It faced the central screen, 3 words that had aggravated its owner to the point of spontaneous action blown up in the middle of the screen, almost mockingly. Operation Elysium Burning. Chapter 19, Dropping the Ball. Normandy Cargo Deck, an hour before the op at Dr. Hart's clinic. Ashley Williams, Alliance Navy Gunnery Chief and Spectre Soldier. And this is where we store most of our immediate supplies, including the ones that were requisitioned during the ambush. When Ashley had been asked by the commander to assist the CCC forensics specialist come on board for weapons and ballistics analysis, she had, rather poorly of her now she thought about it, assumed that it would be a Solarian or an Asari. So when Joker had called her up to the command deck, Ashley had been more than slightly surprised to find herself looking at a female Krogan, something that had been noticed by the Krogan in question who portrayed an aura of expectation and patient acceptance. After getting over the initial shock though, Ashley found AI to be very different from her experiences with other Krogan, even ignoring the fact that AI was almost a foot shorter than any other Krogan she had met. AI had quickly explained that she hadn't even met another Krogan until she was almost 50, and given she had been raised by an Asari/Solarian couple, she had found the fight first, ask questions never attitude espoused by most Krogan as almost incomprehensible to her. Requisition that is one of the more interesting ways I have heard battlefield looting being referred to as. Sorry, I didn't mean to, it's just that this is my first time on an Alliance ship and working directly with a Spectre to boot. That didn't mean that AI didn't take anything from her heritage. The dry and unsubtle sarcasm would make her fit in with Rex on a humor basis if nothing else. No problem, it's not exactly what is considered respectable or honorable, but Lieutenant Uzumaki and the commander are more concerned with keeping us alive and well provisioned. Given we are trying to track down another Spectre, with decades of resources and experience beyond what we have officially been given, I personally have no complaints with bending the rules to play catch-up. Given the reservations of not only Lieutenant Alenko but also Liara and members of the Alliance Marine teams towards Naruto's requisitioning, the fact that others were disapproving of the practice didn't even faze Ashley for a moment. If it weren't for the fact that Naruto or his salvage teams cleared the areas even while combat was going on, she would probably have assisted, as she very much meant what she had just said. Even if this Batarian ambush ended up having nothing to do with Saren, the fact that they had been outnumbered and caught by surprise on the supposedly safe citadel for a second time only made it clear that playing by the rules was going to put them at a mortal disadvantage. Thank you. I will make sure that any equipment not linked to the civilian deaths aren't considered official evidence then. Gibbs hinted as much when he sent me here with Savina. Can I check your team's weapons first? Best to clear all of them in case you need them before I am finished with the. That is a lot of weapons. Given the Mako was now stored on the Ontario most of the time, Commander Shepard and the rest of them had spent some time altering the layout of the cargo bay to suit their needs. Where the Mako had been there was enough space for a small sparring area, for Naruto to train the civilians in hand-to-hand combat, or for when she or one of the other Marines wanted to be put through their paces. Around that were supply crates and other ship-related storage, though most of these were now stored on the Ontario given the massive difference in storage capacity. This accounted for about 2/3 of the right-hand side of the cargo area, with the remaining space on that side allocated for the storage lockers for the strike team members, though even that was getting very cramped given the number of team members they had now. The other half of the cargo space had been transformed into equipment storage racks and facilities, primarily to make the lives of those who liked to tinker with the weapons such as Ashley and Rex easier, as Naruto had a bad habit of simply piling his spoils indiscriminately. They certainly weren't on the Citadel for a casual stroll, which makes me wonder how they got through hangar security without raising any alarms or alerts by CCC. It was a rhetorical question for the most part, the lack of all but the most basic security on the Citadel something that had been raised and then suppressed as part of the official investigation into the assassination attempt of the commander and Executor Pellin. Given that the attempted suppression of the issue had only come after the initial report had been published to the senior bureaucrats on the Citadel, it had taken no time for the whole document to be leaked onto the extranet. This had been something of a scandal at the time, though it had quickly been overtaken by other gossip as was typical of the Citadel's populace. The Executor has the same concerns. He has members of our cyber division checking for discrepancies with the docking and cargo records of the last few days, but given the volume of traffic, AI shrugged in a what-can-you-do manner. Before she let go of the grav cart she was pulling along full of her scientific instruments to move towards the nearest of the weapon racks, which contained some of the sidearms and smaller weapons the Batarians had been carrying with them. Based on the preliminary analysis, the deaths of the civilians were mostly caused by large-caliber rounds rather than standard ammunition. So, while I test your team's weapons, Would someone be able to separate out those types of weapons? It would definitely make things quicker to sort out. Ashley knew she could have called one of the crew to do it, but given everyone would merely waiting for some lead for them to chase, it wasn't like she had a lot else to do right now. Sure, I will sort through them now. It shouldn't take too long. Normandy Command Deck, 20 minutes later. Mari, the new growth. Has anyone reviewed the footage from? What about this ship? Who took my coffee? It was strange to see such a contrast, there really wasn't a better word, between her memories as Shikamaru and the chaos that was happening around her in the ship she now called home. None of the, admittedly disorganized, memories she had of the ninja were of much use in this situation. For the most part, Mari found herself relying on the memories of Shirala, the fleas Asari offered to the old growth by Saren, whose memories had been copied by the old growth. The Asari commando had been well traveled, even before she had joined up with matriarch Benizia and then ultimately Saren, driven by a wanderlust that many Asari fall prey to at least once in their comparatively long lives. Such experience would be advantageous for Naruto to use against the Cold Ones and their puppet who pretended to be the puppet master, the part of her developed by Shikamaru's memories allowing her to analyze the Asari's fighting style and be impressed at her skill. If not her magnitude of ability in comparison to what she had seen some ninja perform. The fact that Shirala was still on the Ontario, in one of the retrofitted cells Naruto had requested, was something that Mari thought might be useful in the near future. Though, in all the chaos that had happened since finding Ino on Pharos, Mari got the feeling that Commanders Shepard and Naruto had forgotten about the recovering Asari commando. If so, they probably wouldn't mind if she struck up a deal with Benizia's ex-follower. Physical training would always beat memories or theoretical knowledge after all. Is it always so chaotic aboard this ship, Officer Mari? I will admit this is not what I expected of a Spectre's crew, even in these circumstances. It took a few moments before Mari realized that the question had been directed at her, mainly by looking around to see that there was physically no one else within easy hearing distance. Her eyes meeting those of the Drell Zavina, who was looking at her now with the sort of piercing gaze that made it difficult for Mari to not reflexively alter her form for combat. Naruto had asked Mari to keep an eye on the CSCC officer while she was on the ship, a sign that many of Commander Shepard's crew took as an indication of her skill and trustworthiness, but Mari wasn't so sure. In fact, logically she knew this was as much a test for her abilities outside of combat, a rather troublesome sign that Naruto knew exactly where she was lacking in. No idea, I have only recently come aboard myself. Even as she finished speaking, Mari winced, knowing even before Zavina's eyes widened ever so slightly that the Drell had caught her slip up. So, they assign a rookie to keep an eye on me and make sure I don't go anywhere I shouldn't. I think I should feel a little upset about that. But I suppose I shouldn't look a gift cow in the mouth. The odd phrase threw Mari off for a moment, and she had to resist the strange urge to correct the phrase to what she thought was correct. But that was based on Shikamaru's memories, so for all Mari knew the phrase Zavina had used was correct in this time/culture. Thankfully, before Mari had to work out whether she needed to try and continue the conversation, Zavina's Omni-tool beeped to life with a series of messages. Ducky has been efficient as always, it seems. Is there somewhere quieter that we can go? I wish to have a look through the data myself, before handing it over to the crew. I am meant to be assisting the investigation after all. Besides, they are all running around like a group of headless. You get the idea? Mari didn't, or at least didn't get whatever reference Zavina was referring to, but reaching out to her spores she focused on answering the question rather than her need to develop her common knowledge in the near future. The area by the cockpit should be free, and it is a little quieter at least. Could you forward me the data as well? Then I can look through it at the same time. If the Normandy was in flight, then the cockpit wouldn't have been free. Joker even slept in the pilot's seat sometimes, rather than go through all the effort of hauling himself down to the bunks on the crew deck. But even Joker needed downtime, and reaching out further with her ship-wide network of spores, Mari found the man playing some kind of card game with Engineer Adams and a couple of the other engineers. Mari had been more than prepared to not release any spores on the Normandy. Given what had happened to the colonists on Pharos, caution was expected if not outright suspicion. But after the Batarian ambush, which she hadn't even heard about before it was almost overdue to her self-appointed task of watching over Eno from the shadows, Commander Shepard had ordered her to do it the moment her sister was in the med bay. It seemed that the commander was far more protective of her newly discovered family than worried about another espionage attack. Of course, please lead the way. Though you will have to provide me an extranet address for me to send you the files. For a moment Mari froze, realizing the gigantic error she had potentially just made, given that her own Omni-tool was less than a day old. She had Shiala's memories of how to use such a device, which helped. But she hadn't even gotten around to trying it out, let alone setting up an extranet account, after a Naruto clone dropped it off earlier that day's cycle. Pressing the email function on her Omni-tool, Mari was more than slightly relieved when it started up, with a single email in her inbox that she immediately realized was probably from Naruto. Of course, here is the address. Reeling off the numbers that she had instantly memorized after opening her email for the first time, Mari knew that Zavena was probably surprised by her actions, but the Drell didn't mention it as she typed away into her Omni-tool. There you go. Now let's have a look. As Zavena started looking through several 3D representations of what looked like the Batarians' initial autopsies, there was a stream of pinging noises that symbolized the arrival of the same data to her Omni-tool. There was a massive amount of data, which given it had only been a few hours since the ambush was a sign that at least one part of CCC was efficient in its operation. Just because the data was available though didn't mean that Mari knew where to start. The old growth had never had to deal with such a form of data crunching. Shiala had always been more of a solving problems directly type as well, which left Mari with one persona she could call upon. Mari didn't dislike the memories that Shikamura had forced upon her, especially as they had saved her life with Naruto, but that didn't mean they weren't different. Even as she plunged into them, she could feel her own mindset changing to become similar to that of the shinobi who Naruto referred to as the lazy genius. Little facts from around her suddenly began to jump out to her in a way that they had never done so before. Even glancing at Zavena made her head hurt from the number of subtle tells that the Drell had. The conclusions her mind reached echoing like little voices in her head as Mari drew her eyes back to the data in front of her. Well-trained, far beyond CSCC standards. Pendant chain visible around neck, only personal touch to her otherwise regulation prefect CSCC uniform. Strong attachment to pendant, but one that implies that the one it is related to is no longer here. Beyond email and official CCC security programs, nothing other than the starting programs on her Omni-tool. Lonely. The last point was particularly jarring to Mari, even as a flux of similar data began to flow over her from her spore network, the little voices growing to a cacophony in her mind as she struggled not to grab her head as the pain built. If this was what Shikamura had to put up with all the time, no wonder the man liked to spend as much of his time asleep as he could. Given some of the things her spores had just told her, Mari wouldn't be able to look at some of the crew in the same way again. Breaking her connection with her spores for the moment, Mari almost sighed in relief as the voices disappeared, and after a few moments she was able to focus on the files in front of her once more. Focusing seemed to help, as the voices about the other things she could see/hear/smell disappeared almost entirely, allowing her to begin searching through the documents with remarkable speed. Officer. Mari! The shouting voice in her ear suddenly brought Mari from her zoned-in state to find Commander Shepard and Naruto stood next to her, the blonde ninja looking relieved even as he dodged back to avoid her reflexive punch. Zavena has been trying to talk to you for the last 10 minutes, but got no response from you. Given your focused state, she grew concerned and contacted us. It's good we got you out of that. Joker needs his seat back. A glance at her Omni-tool told Mari she had lost almost an hour in her focused state, and she was never more pleased about being a plant rather than an actual Asari, as she didn't blush. Though judging by Naruto's teasing smirk he could sense her embarrassment even if she wasn't actively displaying it. Eyes darting around the cockpit, muscles slightly tensed and knees slightly bent. Smile that doesn't match body language, one hand always near weapons pouch. Nervous about ambush and weakness in Citadel security. Eyes not focusing on me while scanning, other hand relaxed and smile changing slightly as eyes pass me. Happy to see me? She found something? Mari did the best to ignore the voices in her head, as she separated from Shikamaru's memories once more, the throbbing headache something she could deal with once the focus was off her. Mari had news of her own to share, of course, but it would take quite some time for her to sort it all out in her own head, now that she didn't have Shikamaru's mindset to assist in that process. We will worry about that later. When the rest of the crew are back, I will brief everyone. Are you okay though? It was almost like you were in a trance. I am sure that Medic Nirali would be available if you are not feeling well. Commander Shepard's concern was a slight surprise, given the Slayer of the Old One had more than enough reasons to dislike her, but after a moment Mari was cognizant enough to shake her head. I am fine, I just let my focus get away from me. I will head to the medbay though. I seem to have a bit of a headache. Naruto's eyebrow gave the slightest of twitches, enough of a reaction to let Mari know that he suspected she wasn't telling them everything, but as she stood a little shakily he merely shifted to allow her past. Whether that was because Naruto trusted her enough to tell her later, or because of some other reason she couldn't quite fathom, Mari decided she would think about it later, after she had managed to get rid of this blasted headache. Commander Shepard's cabin, the Normandy, 20 minutes after end of Dr. Hardop. Naruto Uzumaki, Alliance Lieutenant and Spectre Soldier. You are not the one we expected to see, Officer Uzumaki. Where is Commander Shepard? Busy making sure the Normandy is ready for hunting the moment everyone gets back on the ship. But there's no way I'm telling you that. Looking across the commander's cabin to where the communication relay had been set up, Naruto shrugged. No idea. But if I had to guess, I would suppose that she's dealing with the aftermath of what has got to be the 5th or 6th assassination attempt that has been launched against our team on the Citadel. Got to say, the place isn't seeming anywhere near as secure or safe as you guys claimed from your ivory tower. It was probably a little too blasé a crack about the broadcasts the Council had done in the aftermath of the rocket attack, but Naruto was angry enough that he didn't care about annoying the Council a little more than usual. Unfortunately, the counselors seemed to have developed thicker skins since the last time he had gotten into verbal combat with them, as the Turian counselor's gritted jaw was the only sign his words had any effect. The dangers of being a Spectre are well known throughout history. Perhaps the Alliance should have looked deeper into that before risking you. I mean their hero in such a manner. Not bad from the Asari counselor. Naruto could feel his anger rising at the casual disregard of the threats Jane-chan faced, as well as the implying that closeness they shared had been noted and frowned upon by Jane-chan's commanders. That's true, such a position of responsibility always comes with risks, which is usually why they are such respected and well-provisioned roles. How is the automated transfer of ex-Spectre Saren team's files to Commander Shepard going, by the way? He could have carried on the taunt, with a jibe about how little time it had taken Saren to get hold of Nihilus files, but given the flinch from the Asari counselor it seemed that wouldn't be necessary. Enough, we did not contact one of our Spectres for the purpose of getting into a shouting match with one of her low-life mercenaries. Go and find Commander Shepard, and tell her she is to report to the council chamber now. She will be remanded in the secure holding facilities at CCC, until the CCC investigation answered the accusations the Batarian hegemony have raised about the unlawful murder of their lawful agents. The Turian obviously enjoyed the opportunity to rub in the fact that officially Naruto was nothing more than a thug, seconded by the Alliance to serve under Shepard as a hired gun. But as the purpose of their call became clear, Naruto lost the easygoing smirk that had been present for the conversation so far, reaching over the table to press pause on the small voice recorder that Commander Shepard had recorded every conversation she had in her quarters. Ignoring the looks and insisting comments from two of the three counselors, Naruto rewound the recording and played through the Turian counselor's words once more. Huh, and here I thought I'd misheard again. Placing the recorder down once more, after repressing the record button of course, Naruto let his face fall into the emotion-dampening mask that some of the survivors taught him, and the other genin. Stop your babbling. That was as far as the Turian counselor got, before Naruto slammed his fist into the metal table without holding back. He'd pay Shepard Taishu for the dent in it later. I think you will forgive me for babbling in a few minutes, though that depends how quickly you get it through your closed-minded heads that I am preventing a galactic civil war by not bringing Shepard Taishu here. For a moment there was complete silence, before the Turian counselor growled in anger. Before the Turian could say anything, though, the Solarian acted. The frog-like alien raised the omnitool arm and a flash erupted from it, making the Turian's visage disappear from the screen. There was a rather uncharacteristic look of fury on the Solarian's face, as they turned their gaze on the Asari counselor, who seemed like she wanted to protest. Enough, two of you obviously clouded in your opinions regarding Operative Uzumaki, reason unknown. No doubt one of many things Counselor Valorn did not transfer when replacement vote succeeded. It was at this point that Naruto felt a little embarrassed beneath his mask. Now that he focused on the Solarian, it was obvious that this wasn't the same Solarian that had been on the council during the Sarin debacle. Based on the way that the new Solarian had spoken, it was entirely possible that the Sarin debacle was the reason that the position had changed hands. Rather than acting like human tadpoles, perhaps better if Operative Uzumaki and I converse by ourselves. Then, when he has passed on concerns and I evaluate them as threat assessment, he can contact Commander Shepard whilst we convene. Or perhaps the two of you can act like the professional representatives you are? Given the sharp look the Solarian sent Naruto's way when he tried to pipe up, it was clear that they had some words to aim in his direction if he did, as the sounds of the Turian counselor's shouting lessened and then disappeared. You have been in this role less than a week, Counselor DeZoro. Obviously you still need to learn how to act a little more professionally yourself. We do not attack each other as a method of stopping an argument. Despite the Asari's admonishment, it was clear that she wasn't going to be more difficult about the reminder she had been given already, causing the Solarian to lower their omnitool once more. Yet, personally attack skilled assassin with known techniques that would make infiltration of council chambers undetected simple, and with other skills still hidden? Logic dictates such an enemy is best to avoid, ally would be preferred. Good to see you understand my point, Counselor Tevos, Counselor Spiratus letting heart rule head again. From the exasperation in Counselor DeZoro's tone, even if they had only been in the role a week, the Turian counselor had been a pain in the ass the entire time. I am not happy with the situation, and we will be having words when this is done, Counselor DeZoro. But I have learned that dismissing Operative Uzumaki lightly is a very dangerous idea, and I will admit I let my desire to get back for his earlier embarrassments get the better of me. I apologize to both of you. The apology was unexpected enough that Naruto let the surprise he felt appear on his face for a moment, though the Solarian waved it off dismissively. Words easy, actions much better tell of sincerity. Now, Operative Uzumaki. Elucidate on galactic war you foresee. Possibility is very real, hint you gave very useful in highlighting reason, but your reasoning important for understanding. The female Solarian, though he couldn't be sure given how similar Solarians looked to him, ignored the shocked look on Counselor Tevos' face as she gave him the chance to speak. Well, there are two possibilities as far as I can see, though the first is the only one I am sure of. Given the desire to effectively imprison Shepard Taishu without a trial on murder charges, despite the fact that the videos of the Batarians launching the ambush against her are already all over the extranet, it would be less than an hour before that got out to the masses. The fact that Naruto would have it spread over the Citadel in less than half that time went unsaid. The Solarian counselor had already indicated she had been read in on his abilities. Given the concerns about anti-human sentiment amongst the Alliance raised during Sarenteam's trial, and the disparity between how you are treating the hero of the Alliance in comparison to the team's treatment, there would be riots in the streets. Even if you did manage to suppress them without any deaths, which I doubt, the CCC investigation then becomes pointless. To Naruto's surprise, Counselor DeZoro was smiling at his words, while Counselor Tevos was frowning in a manner that made it clear she was trying to mentally refute them. You would either have to follow through with charging Shepard Taishu in a show trial that wouldn't be worth the scroll it is recorded on, or to drop the charges. The first would definitely cause the Alliance to break with the Council, if not launch Spec Ops operations to rescue her. Operations that he would be a part of, officially or otherwise. Even if we did rescue her without killing anyone, the Batarians would declare war on the Alliance for obstructing justice or some other such bullshit. The Council races would then be drawn in or would have to admit the farce, fully destroying any chance of reconciling with the Alliance for centuries either way. Even if you dropped the charges, the Batarians would retaliate with their pirate fleets attacking every small colony remotely near the terminus, and the results would be pretty much the same. It was the extreme scenario, of course. Cooler heads would probably have prevailed before Jane-chan even made it to the Presidium, but Naruto was done playing nice with these idiots. He had extended the olive branch during Saren's trial, and this conversation was the metaphorical equivalent of setting it alight after covering it in toad oil. You certainly have a flair for the dramatic, Operative Uzumaki. You can't think that the alliance would break with the council over a single. Counselor Tevos was cut off as Counselor Dezoro spoke up. Reputed hero of largest invasion since human first contact, first human specter, and well-publicized savior of at least 2 human settlements in recent months. That is just top 3 notable achievements from memory. As pivotal figures in destroying galactic balance go, far more influential than nearly anyone I could list. Commander Shepard is known to nearly every human in the galaxy, unwise to underestimate importance as figurehead. Naruto had to give credit to the Solarian, as Tevos' face paled a little as the logical argument neatly demolished her own. You have a point, though. In my defense, Spiratus vastly overstepped himself in his demands. Apologies, Operative Uzumaki. The actual reason we wish for Commander Shepard to stay on the Citadel is to respect the procedures set out in the Council mandate regarding specters. We made a mistake, not enforcing them with Saren, and I am sure you can understand why we cannot skirt the rules again after that. It seemed Tevos had changed her view on this matter, though given that was perhaps because she realized how dangerous her previous stance could have been. Naruto didn't feel like relaxing anytime soon. Point about anti-human sentiment clear, but not risk hinted at by Operative Uzumaki, at least not obviously. Naruto kept finding his respect for the new counselor rising, as she caught on to the fact he had been less willing to point out, to the council at least. But just because she was currently aligning with him didn't mean she was an ally by any means, and competence was as dangerous in an enemy as it was helpful in a potential friend, something he would have to keep an eye on, no doubt. Still, she had left the door open for him, and to not say something now would definitely impact any positive impression she had of him so far. The second risk is dependent on 2 things about the Batarian complaint, the first being whether it is an official complaint, and the second is whether the counselor used the complaint's words verbatim about the ambushes. Even as Naruto spoke, he could see the wheels turning in Counselor Tevos' head. Despite the fact he saw her and the Turian counselor as idiots for how they had dealt with Saren, and Jane-chan in general, he doubted you could become one of the Citadel Council by being a complete idiot. A moment later it seemed that she understood what he was implying as she rapidly tapped into her Omni tool for a few moments before shaking her head. It is an official complaint, which given that it had only been an hour or so since the attack when we received it means they must have known the attack was going to happen before it did. Given the amount of evidence and paperwork that had been needed before Jane-chan and the Alliance could launch any action against Saren officially, Naruto wasn't surprised by this revelation. But Counselor Spiratus seems to have been taking liberties with his wording again. They state that the dead Batarians are innocent hegemony citizens, nothing about them being agents. Counselor Dezoro chuckled a little morbidly before waving her hand dismissively again. Wording still dangerous. Hegemony cannot claim mere pirates or gangsters when murder attempt proved by CCC. Indeed, timing of complaint can only show prior knowledge of attempt by hegemony leadership, at least some of them. Operative Uzumaki is almost certainly correct in his views. Premeditated murder attempt on Council Spectre by Batarian government. More than enough reason for military reprisal if brought to the public, which confining Commander to Citadel certainly would lead to. I am assuming, given your antagonistic avoidance of mentioning where Commander Shepard is, that you have a lead of where these attackers came from? The tangential comment from Counselor Tevos caused Naruto to raise an eyebrow, the limit of showing his surprise that he would let slip through right now. And if we did? Tevos and Dezoro shared a look for several seconds, before for the first time in the conversation they appeared to agree on something. If lead leads direct to Batarian space, pass lead onto us. Council must formally announce grievance before Spectres move into hegemony in force to investigate. Would request delayed departure, until we can organize other Spectres to join you, force and numbers after all. Tevos picked up where Dezoro finished, an uncharacteristically harsh expression on her face. Even if the lead is not towards Batarian-controlled space, this attempt proves that the hegemony think that they are untouchable for whatever reason they have concocted in their heads. I will have all of our intelligence gathering efforts focused on the Batarian pirate operations in the Terminus, and we will pass along all the information we already have to you. While we will initiate our own response diplomatically against the Batarians for their arrogance, crippling the slaving operations in the Terminus will be a good start in convincing them of their error. Naruto relaxed his mask completely now, as it seemed that the Council had its own issues with the hegemony. While they didn't want a war to erupt, something that Naruto could support given the current situation with Saren and the Reapers, a line was very clearly being drawn now. Well, in which case, counselors, you better get your spies to work, because if CSEC's lead pans out, we will be going outside of Citadel space. That was as much as Naruto was prepared to give regarding the lead, as he didn't know whether the Council were anywhere near as secure as they thought they were. Given how easily someone like Kasumi had gotten onto the Normandy, Naruto guessed it was probably not much more difficult to infiltrate the private areas of the Council chambers. Very well, the full report after lead followed required Operative Uzumaki. Then discussion over your relationship with this council can be mediated in calmer setting. Your powers make you a unique asset, or a powerful enemy if left to fester. As former STG operative, prefer not to make enemies due to extenuating circumstances. It wasn't a rebuke as such, but it was clear that Counselor DeZoro was judging him as being as part of the problem between him and the council, rather than just the other counselors. Of course, Counselor, I look forward to working more with you in the future. The fact that Naruto actually meant what he said seemed to get across in his tone or his slight bow, as Counselor Tevo's shocked face was the last thing he saw before the connection was cut. There was a moment of silence, as Naruto let the emotions the rather confrontational conversation had stirred up, before a voice spoke up with unconcealed amusement in its tone. And here I thought your respect for authority figures had improved, Naruto-kun. But perhaps that is just for Jane-san after all. Given the chaos that was going on everywhere else on the ship, and the fact that Jane had commandeered the infirmary, Naruto had brought Ino through to the commander's cabin for some peace and quiet. As much as Ino tried to claim she was okay with the translator, Naruto could tell that she was struggling with adapting to their new circumstances, as much if not more than the difficulties she was having with her leg. Given the council were pretty much the last people he wanted her introduced to, something she agreed with after explaining their connection to Saren and the Geth, she had stayed near the door and out of sight while they were talking. Not you as well, Ino-chan. Sakura-chan's going to kill me if she hears stuff like that when we find her. Naruto wasn't stupid enough to actually try and deny the accusation outright. If there was one person better at sniffing out lies than he was, it was the girl who had helped develop his natural ability with her clan's teachings. Forehead will get over it, in fact she. Ino paused for a second, blushing slightly before shaking her head and speaking once more. Never mind, don't think I didn't notice the lack of denial there, Naruto-kun. Does our little knucklehead like hot older women now? Naruto could have tried to press about whatever it was Ino wasn't telling him about Sakura-chan, but this was the closest to being back to normal as he had seen her. And no idea what you are talking about, Ino-chan. Why, are you jealous that I won't be giving you all my attention? He didn't exactly have to force the stutter at the start of his response, as he did have feelings for Jane-chan that he knew were beyond that of friendship. But his ability to turn Ino's attempt to tease him back on her seemed to throw his fellow blonde off for several moments, a blush crossing her face as he mentally scored a point for himself on the metaphorical board that logged the two's teasing competition. There was still several dozen more ticks on Ino's side, he noted with a mental sigh, before turning his attention back to Ino as she suddenly smirked. With a single push of her arms, Ino threw herself out of her wheelchair in his direction, Naruto's arms wrapping around her instinctively to steady her. I don't think you could handle even half of me, Naruto-kun, and I wouldn't want to ruin our relationship by embarrassing you in bed. Though if you want to, you are more than welcome to try. As she sensually whispered the words into his ear, pulling his chest tightly to her own, Naruto groaned mentally even as he tried to remain composed. Damn it, another point to her. Normandy Command Deck, 12 hours after Batarian ambush, 1 hour after drive hard up. Nirali Bhatia, Spectre Medical Assistant, Navy Corpsman. If any of you have somehow managed to miss it, over the course of the last 48 hours on the Citadel, the Normandy has been infiltrated by Cerberus, and we have been attacked by 2 different groups of Spec Ops soldiers numbering in their dozens. Commander Shepard was at her most imposing, as she stood in front of the Normandy's gathered crew in her full combat armor, this speech being fed to the Ontario Live so that Captain Sarah and her crew were involved as well. When Naruto had told her husband that the Citadel, or even Alliance space, wasn't as safe as everyone believed, Nirali had thought he was only saying that to persuade the man to stop arguing with her. But when Commander Shepard laid out how dangerous the last couple of days had been, it became clear that Naruto had been somewhat optimistic about his outlook. From these attacks, and the other attempts on the lives of myself and my crew, we have yet to suffer a permanent casualty. However, this is mostly due to luck and poor planning by our adversaries, and I cannot continue to risk your lives on the chance that Saren keeps sending the same level of useless idiots after us. There were 1 or 2 chuckles at the reference to the quality of Saren's would-be assassins, but these were mostly from the Spectre's strike team itself. The Citadel has proved that it isn't a safe place for civilized people that the Council likes to claim it is. And even this dock, which we are temporarily renting from the Alliance, isn't secure enough to prevent Alliance personnel walking in whenever they like. There were a few confused looks around the Normandy's crew at that comment, though Nirali had happened to be in the know. That morning, despite everything that had happened with the infiltration of the Normandy and the Batarian attack, some Alliance admiral had decided that it was the perfect time to perform a surprise inspection of the Normandy. The man had demanded Commander Shepard's presence for the entire trip, forgetting or ignoring the fact that the commander was no longer part of the official Alliance command structure. The man, Mika, something or other, had been completely shocked therefore when Shepard appeared at the Normandy's airlock in full combat armor. She then proceeded, in a manner that could only be described politely as blunt, to tell the Admiral that appeasing his desire for a pompous parade to soothe his ego was at the bottom of her list of priorities not just now but in general. Though the man seemed to be more than a little annoyed at the disrespectful tone Commander Shepard had used, he surprisingly didn't lose his temper, though it seemed to be a close thing as he stalked away like a wounded predator looking for an easier target to hunt. So, thanks to patronage from a source that would prefer to remain unnamed. To her credit, Commander Shepard's eyes didn't even flicker in the direction of the most likely culprit, but that didn't stop the majority of the Normandy's crew from glancing over to the blonde-haired man most likely the patron in question. A pair of berths will be available for us at the shipyard owned by Shinobi Shipbuilding Co. at a very reasonable rate. Though this is based on one of the lower wards rather than the Presidium, they have given us permission to modify the security of the berths to our specifications. That was beyond generous, and Nirali would be quizzing Naruto later on exactly how he could afford to be so blasé with his finances. While most goods were relatively cheap on the Citadel, in comparison to border or terminus colonies at least, what wasn't cheap was space. Every inch of space on the Citadel was owned by the Council, leased on 2-year or 5-year contracts, and something the size of a ship hangar would cost more than Nirali would probably ever earn. But first, we have some Batarians to hunt down. Commander Shepard's eyes almost turned into slits at this point, her mouth turning into a slight snarl. The bastards who survived attacking me aren't talking, and CCC will take too long to interrogate anything out of them as it is. Luckily, Agent Zavina here managed to use the data supplied by CSEC's mortician to prove that the majority of the assassins had been on the Citadel for less than 2 days, which narrowed down our search period for ships arriving and leaving significantly. Commander Shepard gestured and a small transport ship appeared in the command view screen. This ship was found to have not paid its latest docking fees, and the dock manager remembered it being manned by Batarians, which she found unusual, given its original relay point in the Exodus system. Facial scans confirm that 2 of the deceased are the ones who claimed ownership of the ship, though their records have already been proven fake. The Exodus system was definitely a surprising location for the ship to have come from, though if they wanted to try and hide any links to hegemony, going through Alliance space may have been a good idea. We thought this might be a dead end, until Agent Mari raised a terrifying idea of why the Batarians allowed the leaking of my sister's location to happen this week. After all, if there is one thing that the Batarians could do to strike at humanity, more than assassinating the hero of Elysium. A planet appeared on the screen, and it took a few seconds for Nirali to work out what was being displayed, just in time for the impact event to draw several gasps from around the room. Then wiping out the largest non-soul colony with an asteroid would certainly have an impact.